What's up? In case you didn't know by now, I build design systems for a living. And about a year ago, I started with this Build a Design System series where I actually built a design system across 6 or 7 episodes. It was a real simple design system, not like the tutorials in our academy, but people loved it. So I actually went ahead and refilmed the entire multi-series tutorial and I included it in this one video. So by the end of this video, you're gonna have a full set of design tokens, a real simple starter design system, and you know how to publish design systems and much more. Let's get started. And if you're looking for a new design system or you're looking to uplift your existing design system, I'll put a link below where you can come work with myself and also the team. And if you're a fan about what we're doing with UI Collective, consider checking out UI Collective Academy. I'll put a link for that below with premium courses, premium downloads, a lot more right now, and a ton more on the way. Be sure to check that out because every purchase helps us do more of this. So welcome to the new series on building a design system. And I know like throughout 2020, what year is it? We're 2025. Throughout 2024, where I was like releasing videos and just building the core components, I'm still getting a lot of questions. So I'm going to actually refilm this series all in one clip so you know how to build every design system component. Now, one thing I would like to call out is what we're touching upon today is building the framework for the components. We're building the initial components and their variants. If you really want to master this concept, okay? We do have a course on building a more advanced design system on our academy. But again, we're going to build out every component that you might possibly need, as we did across like 7 or 8 different episodes in 2024, all within this video. Okay. So one thing I want to get started with right away, design token setup structure. Okay. Now, UI Collective has evolved to the point where I see a lot of other creators taking the things that I teach and like releasing it on their own channel, using their own like ideas and methods. Okay. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like to each their own. Like I put this content publicly so everyone can learn, right? Not just so that I can benefit by any means. But as part of that, a lot of these creators, because they don't live and breathe design systems like I do, is like they're adding spins to some of these concepts, but the spins aren't necessarily right. Okay. They aren't thinking about specific use cases, especially when it comes to design tokens. Now, the design token setup that we're going to build today is relatively simple. It's going to get your feet wet in design systems, okay? And if you're building a design system, this is probably a great place for you to start. And you can get into some more complex like theming and approaches in other ways in some of our other videos. I'm just going to walk you through the full process here, okay? So when it comes to your design tokens, they're also like your Figma variables. Okay. There's a couple different approaches. And I know these slides here, I stole from one of my other videos earlier on. But people just said they loved the slides and it made sense. So I'm reusing them here. Okay. So when it comes to setting up your design tokens for your design system, there's a 3-tiered approach to design token architecture and also a 2-tiered approach to design token architecture. We at UI Collective use the 3-tier. Okay, we were using the 3-tier approach long before Figma variables became a thing. We're using the 3-tier approach when we were still using Token Studio, like the Figma plugin, to apply our design tokens. We've been doing this for like 5 years, and we use the 3-tiered approach where we use a brand collection, alias collection, and a mapped collection. Now, there are a lot of Figma kits out there that use the 2-tiered approach. So that's your primitive collection and also your semantic collection. Okay. Whereas the primitive is more like alias and the semantic is more the mapped. It's almost like they skip over the brand collection or sort of merge like the brand and alias collection together. Again, we're going to look at what these are. Okay. Now, a lot of popular design systems use the 2-tier approach. It's not wrong. And if you're using it, it's not wrong. So don't think that you need to rebuild your design system from scratch by any means. Okay. But there are some limitations to use that 2-tiered approach. Okay, especially when you're dealing with multiple brands. And we're going to look at multi-brands, probably the latter part of this video. But we're going to be proceeding with the 3-tiered approach to our design token architecture. So because we're 3-tiered approach guys, okay, I don't want to say like we coined the term, but we've been like teaching people this for like 3 years. So this is like our thing, So let's look at our brand collection to start. Okay. So your brand collection is really just everything in its purest form. And again, I know I have some of these slides in another video. People just love the slides. So I'm using them here too. Okay. Sue me. So in your brand collection, it's just everything in its purest form. In terms of your colors, it's just like a hex code. You haven't even really named it yet. Like you haven't named it like air this or like default this, right? It's just super simple. So in terms of naming though, is we tend to use what's called like the 100 scale. So if it's a red scale, it's red 100 all the way up to 700. With the higher the number, the darker it gets. What this does is allows us to be a little bit flexible. Okay, is if later down the line when we're testing our components for accessibility, and we see that we need a lighter shade than a red 100, okay, to offer like some contrast in order to pass WCAG AA standards. What I can do is I can add a red 50, which is lighter than a red 100. Let's say I need a color that's in between a 200 and 300. I can add a 250, okay? So it allows us to scale up our design tokens. Now, also too, inside your brand collection, font weights, font styles. Okay, this changes a little less frequently. Just because, like, you know, if you're a brand, when on earth would you ever change like your parent font? That's not going to happen. So we tend to store this inside of our brand collection. But if we were multi-brand, we'd bring that into our alias collection. Don't worry, we're going to look at what that means a little bit later on. Okay, so just as like type variables, string variables, sorry, is what we, inside our Figma variables is where we would have those font weights and also those font styles. So like inter light, regular, medium, bold, so on and so forth. And we're also going to have one super large number scale. What this is going to do is going to help us maintain consistency, our text sizes, our spacing, and so much more. And one thing that's important to note is you are not yet assigning a color, a role inside your brand collection, okay? What we do is we actually apply that inside of our alias collection itself. Okay, so I've used this example before, which is like, think of your brand collection as the roots of a tree, whereas your alias and mapped collection would represent other parts of the tree, which we're going to look at later, okay? Because without strong roots, your design system is not going to have the foundation to grow, okay? So your brand collection really is just everything in its purest form that serves as the foundation for everything else that's going to come later. You know, just a value of 25 in a scale, a hex code of 797929, a hex code of 000000, enter, semi-bold, okay? Just everything in its purest form, raw. Nothing has a specific role. Nothing has a specific anything yet. Okay, it's just, I've said it 8 times, everything in its purest form. Let's now go ahead and start to build out a small brand collection that we're going to use to apply to our components a little bit later. Okay, so what I have here are just some sample scales. Okay, just some really common color scales here. And honestly, I might even just get rid of the pink just because it's not a use case that we're going to really need. And we might also want to get rid of that yellow as well, just because it's not going to be a color that we're really going to need for really anything. Okay. At the end of the day, whenever you're building a design system, okay, and what this is sort of like bare bones. Okay. This design system is going to give you a great foundation for you to scale up. Okay, so whether you use some of the tutorials on building an advanced design system in our academy, if you watch some of our other videos where we actually build out some more complex libraries, you can do that. But this is a great like tutorial for anyone getting started building a design system. Maybe you need a refresher building components. And again, this is like almost a repeat of a lot of our other build a design system series tutorials. Okay, so one thing I would like to call out here is if you think about UI Collective as a brand, okay, we're this purple. If you're on our website and there's something wrong with the form, you're going to hit an error. If something's successful, you might see a green. Text, of course, is going to be gray. You might see an orange for warning, and you might see a blue for information. What other kinds of colors would you need? Any ideas? Not really. Like, in the grand scheme of things, these are really the only core scales that you need, okay? At least if you're getting started. Your core brand color, again, maybe you might have a couple brand colors. You might have a red for error, green for success, so on and so forth. So you're just getting started. Don't overcomplicate your scale. The thing that I see designers do when they're just getting started is they build like 400 different color scales with 900 colors each. Okay, that's not going to help anyone. Right? That's way too complex. We don't need to do that. If you're getting started building your design system, just start with your base colors and a certain number of colors in your scales, and then you can always scale up later. Okay? So before we get into building the brand collection, I want to show you how I actually built out some of these scales. So sorry, I just made some tweaks to this, but I just added additional scale element. Anyways, I'm going to show you how I'm going to build out these scales. Now, there are tools that can help you do this. I'm kind of a nerd when it comes to my scales, and that I like total control. Okay. Sometimes I don't always trust like these color palette generators that are out there. Like for all of my design system clients, I really just do it myself. I build all the scales myself. Okay. So what I do is, like in the case of UI Collective, let's say like this here is our core brand color. What I do to generate the lighter and darker scales is at first I make sure the page is set to like a white background, and then I just play around with the opacity. So I set this to like 80, this to like 60, this to like 40, this to like 20, and then this to like 10. And notice how the colors like match, but we don't want colors with opacity inside our scale, like our actual design system scale. So we really just color match what that color is. So by doing that, we get rid of the actual like opacity, and we like create a nice, clean, consistent scale. Okay. The same thing going up, but instead of on a white background, what you can do is just set it to black, and then just bring it to the front, just like that. And then still just adjust the opacity, but it's still going to get darker because instead of whiter, because it's on the opacity is dealing with a black background. Okay. So that's how I build out these color scales. Again, there are tools that are out there that can help you do that. I just personally just don't like using them. So if you do want to build out your own scales, that's the way that you can do it. Okay, so let's go into our variables here and let's like build out our brand collection here. Okay, so when I say like variables in their purest form, like you're really going to see what I mean. Okay, so color variable. Sorry, I don't know why I thought about doing that. There we go. Let me extend this out, give ourselves some space here. So this is going to be our purple. Okay, so although it's like our UI Collective like primary color, is just going to be our purple because it's in the brand collection. But one thing I didn't do is I did not rename this collection to brand. Okay. And then what we're going to do, we're going to set this. If we think about like the opacity, so these all followed like 20% intervals. So this here was like our, well, let's see how many we have. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 colors. Okay. So we're going to have purple dash 100. Okay. We're just going to duplicate this 9 times, 8, and then 9, and then just rename them. Okay. 300, 400, 500. 600, 700, 800, 700, 800, and then 900. But what's an issue with this is that all of the scales followed a 20% opacity interval, except one, which is the last one. So could that be a nice, crisp, clean, 100 value if it didn't follow this specific 20% interval? Okay, this is just how I do things. Okay, is if it follows the interval that I start with, whether that's a 10% interval or a 20% interval, is I assign it a 100 value. If it doesn't follow that, if it breaks that logic where it starts to follow a 10% interval, it can't be a nice 100 value. Okay, so what we're going to do then is we're now going to shift. Is if this is our lightest, and this was only actually built using a 10% interval. Okay, what I mean by that, okay, again, is if I close this, and this is where things are kind of confusing, is if I take this, which is our core color, and then I set this to simply 10%, and then this to 20%, notice how these initial colors follow that nice, crisp, clean interval, but this last color doesn't follow that pattern. So these here would be the 100 values, but this one would have to be a 50 because it went down half of 20 to 10. So here we had 20%, here we had 10%. If you have any questions on that, leave a comment below. Okay. So instead of having a 900 value, all of a sudden what we're going to do, we can delete that. But just at the end here is we're going to have, oops, sorry, I don't know why I did that, is we're going to have a 50. And that 50 is going to represent the one that had just a 10% opacity decrease. Okay. That's something that's important to call out. Let's look at a quick example of that again. So say we want to add one in between our 40% and our 20% opacity, where we just take it down 30. Okay. Then what we would do is if we have our 50, we have our 100, Then in between our 100 and our 200, we would include a 150 because it went down just 10%. Okay. That's how I like to keep things nice and organized. Okay. I do know that can be a confusing topic. So if you're confused, drop a comment below, ask on our community forum, and I'll get back to you. Okay. So now that we have that out of the way, let's go through and keep building out the brand collection. So then what we can do is we can just simply just use our color matching tool and just color match. Now, the reason why, or even just select the color codes here, that might be a little bit easier. And I know this is a little bit tedious, but I want to make sure that although this is a simple design system, it's not going to be the best looking design system in the world. If you want to build better components, like our Build an Advanced Design System series on our Academy does cover that a little bit better. But it's going to be a design system that's going to get you started. Okay. We're going to talk about a lot of the edge cases, how to build like some of these basic, more like skeleton components, and things like that. So, oops, I broke something there. Again, I'm doing this individually, building out each of these scales, copying the hex codes so you can slow down the video and follow along with us. Okay. So there's our purple out of the way. Now let's just simply, we can just duplicate this group, just call this our red. And then we can simply just color match. Okay. Maybe work from the top down. There we go. So again, slow down the video if you want to. There we go. And I hope I didn't make any mistakes here along the way. And if I did, feel free to call me out. There we go. Now let's duplicate this. Let's go with a green. Same thing. We'll work from the bottom up. And big shout out to everyone who's like purchased our Academy. Oops, I noticed a mistake here. Sorry, when I was building out these scales in preparation for this video, I made a couple mistakes. There we go. So forgive me there. There's probably a couple more mistakes somewhere here, which there are. So we're just going to correct these. Sorry, I try my best sometimes, but sometimes my best isn't good enough. It looks like the labels are right though. So we're just going to copy the labels here. There we go. Yeah, big shout out to everyone who's purchased our Academy. Really goes a long way, honestly. Sorry, I know it's kind of cheesy, but it is. There we go. So there we have our green. And then what we're going to do is we're going to duplicate this, and we're just going to call this like our gray. Does gray have an A or an E? I don't know. Sorry, grammar was never my strong suit. There we go. We're rocking and we are rolling, my friends. Perfect. There we go. So there we have our gray. Let's duplicate this. And this here is going to be our orange. Yeah, we'll go from the top down this time. Oops, sorry, I don't know why I did that. Let me just copy this in. Again, slow down the video if you'd like to. And it looks like a little dark, honestly, but it's okay. We're going to pretend everything's fine. Slow down the video if you want to. Copy the hex code. Sorry, I know I've said that a million times. And let's just duplicate this, and this here is just going to be our blue. Oh, sorry, I don't know why I did that again. There we go. Copy in. 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 And copy this in. And there we go. Okay, we're rocking and we're rolling. So we start to have like our brand collection all set up now, but we're still missing a couple things from our brand collection. At least we have our colors, but we're still missing like our scale and also our font weight and like our font type as well, our font style, I guess you could say. So we're still missing that. So let's look at that next. So now what we're going to do is we're going to use like or start to build out sort of our fonts in here. Okay, so what we can do is we can just group these into sorry, what's going on here? Actually, no, sorry, I'm not going to do that. Let's just go to our all variables, and let's just create a string variable, okay, that we're going to call our font weight, okay, and then enter, okay. Now, when it comes to what's going on here, sorry, let me move that out of the way. Is when it comes to fonts, okay, so I already have enter selected, so let me just zoom this in, maybe center this just so we can see it, okay. When it comes to your font weight, the name of your font is going to be the value of the font. So I'm going to go ahead, apply a variable here. That's going to be enter. Okay, that's that easy. Okay, so now I can see there's a connect between the font and Figma. Okay, so it's telling me that enter is applied and recognizes enter as a font. What I'm going to do is I can also do something like pop-ins. And this is where you can get into like more specifics. So maybe like enter is for, your headings, and pop-ins is for your text. Okay, and still, because it's not crossed off here, you can see that there's a connection between them. Okay, if I was to call this enter one, int 1r, you can see how there's no longer a connection there because there's no font that's called this. But when I change this back to enter, all of a sudden there's a connection again. Okay, so then we can set this to body. You can also get into things like caption and stuff here as well, but like we're not going to worry about that now. We're just going to worry about getting you a starting design system and teaching you concepts along the way so that you can scale up. Okay, but maybe for now we have headings and body. What we're going to do, we can just duplicate this and maybe just go our font. Sorry, let me confirm something here. Sorry, this is font family, not font weight. Sorry, hands up, that's on me. This here is font weight. Okay, and then for font weight, if I was to detach this, okay, your font weight would need to match what's here. Okay, you can't have like just SB for semi-bold as the value. It need to match the weight of the font. So here we can have, like regular, medium, and then bold, and it would need to match the naming here. Okay, so this here would be regular, this would here would be medium, and then this here would be bold. Really that simple. And you can also even add maybe just like a semi sorry, we have a medium, but we also have a semi-bold. So let's also maybe go with a semi-bold as well. Okay, semi-bold and then semi-bold. Okay, that simple. So there we have the specific values. And if I was also to go ahead again and apply, enter for our body, because this is maybe 12 pixels tall. And if we were to apply a variable here as well, we could apply the medium. I can see it because it's not crossed off, that Figma sees the connection between them. Okay, so when it comes to setting up your font family, font weight within your brand, there you have it. So now that we have that out of the way, let's look at like our scale. Okay, so what your scale is, and this is a little bit more of an advanced topic. So what your scale is, just one large number scale that's really just called scale. Let's set a first value of like 0. So anytime you have a number variable later on, is you're going to pull from this one scale. Okay, for things like your width, your radius, spacing, padding, gap, all that fun stuff. Okay, generally always comes from this scale. Okay, this is an advanced concept, and only really advanced design systems end up maintaining consistency in their scale. Absolutely everything with a number comes from that scale. Okay, I don't think we're going to do that for this video. It's going to take too long. It's a little bit tedious. But if you do want to go that route, anytime you use a number, once we get into the responsive collection, all those numbers should pull from one parent scale. And in your brand collection is where we house that scale. Okay, so the way I like to do a scale is I still, of course, like to follow that 100 approach. Okay, so this is our 100 scale value, very similar to what we did with colors. But the only difference is that whereas with our colors, those each of those clean like 100 values had to do with an opacity, our 100s now are going to deal with a multiple of 4. Okay, so 100 is 4. Our 200 is going to be 8. Our 300 is going to be 12. Our 400 is going to be 16. Our 500 is going to be 20. And I'll answer your questions in just a sec. I'm about to pause this and walk you through some use cases. Our 600 is going to be 24. Our 700 is going to be 28. I hope I didn't mess up here. If you did, feel free to call me out. And then our 800 is going to be 32. Okay. Now, right away, You're probably wondering, Kirk, where's like a 1 point border radius is pretty common, right? Absolutely. So if that's the case, what we can do, we can apply a 25 that has the value of 1. And even like a 2-pixel border width for something like a focus, we can apply the value of 50, and that would be a 2. There we go. We've covered some common use cases here. Now, a lot of other creators who watch some of my other videos, they start saying that it's no problem if you just add just like a 3 in here, okay? It's just weird if you do, okay? Because everything should be this nice, crisp, clean, even number. It's very rare for you to sort of mix odd numbers with even numbers. So I wouldn't suggest it at all, okay? Now, one thing you can do as well is you can start to get kind of fancy, because let's say like you have widths that go up to like 256. 256 divided by 4, if I bust out my handy dandy calculator, 256 divided by 4 is equal to 64. That means we need to have 64 values in our scale. No need for that, okay? You're not going to use all those colors. So once you get to a certain point, not going to use all those like scale numbers, sorry. So once you get to a certain point, you can kind of just like increase your number, but still stick to that 100 value. So maybe from 32, we want to go to 40. That can be a 900. As long as it still follows that 4-pixel scale, you're fine. 1,000, maybe we go with a 48, okay? An 1,100, maybe right now, because we don't want to have anything in like the 50s, maybe this you just jump right to a 64, okay? So we might come back and adjust the scale a little bit later, but that's a real like starting, let's like a scale in a nutshell. So now we can apply things like our border widths, our border radiuses. And once we get into a responsive collection as well, some of our font styles and stuff might be here too. So now I want to look at the alias collection. And your alias collection is where you're breaking out colors into categories, okay? Again, I know these slides are from another video, but anyways, people loved them, so here they are again, okay? So where we have like red 100, 200, 300, in your alias collection, you're assigning those scales a specific role. So things like error, like primary, success, warning, okay? These variables aren't yet applied to our components, but we're starting to really start to theme them out, okay? So we do this ultimately to maintain consistency. So as this example, as we have this error alert right here, okay, this error alert should pull from the error scale, not the primary scale. Because if everything that's red pulls from an error scale, it's going to confuse our developers because everything's going to be in an error state, okay? And that's the case of just we have two colors, like our primary and our error, both red, okay? Alias is also where we define all our other miscellaneous variables like our border radius and our border width. It's also where we define another brand. Okay, and we're going to look at that as well. Hey, what's going on? Thanks so much for watching and making it this far in the video. Look at this. I got the sun shining on me here. If you're grateful for what we're doing at UI Collective and want to support myself and the team, be sure to check out our UI Collective Academy. I'll put a link for that down below. So back to our tree example is... your alias collection is where you start to get into like the trunk of a tree, whereas our mapped collection that we're going to look at is more like the leaves of a tree that branches out all these like great, awesome visuals that everyone can see from far and wide. We need to be able to connect our brand collections, so the foundations, to those specific variables. And that's the purpose of like our alias collection is it's more of a tree trunk than anything else in helping us sort of get to that beautiful final state. I know this is confusing, but bear with us. I promise you it's going to make sense. Okay, so now let's look at building out our alias collection. Okay, so when it comes to your alias collection, is what we're going to do is we're going to start applying roles to some of our scales. Okay, let's look at what I mean by that. So let's start off with our primary. If we go into our brand, in the case of UI Collective, this purple is our primary color. So in our alias, we're going to apply the role of primary. So what we can do now is just duplicate the exact same scale that we had before. So we had a 100, 200, 300, 400, 500, 600, 700, and then 800. Then what we're going to do is we're just going to create the alias and connect back to our primary color, like our purple color inside of our brand collection, sorry. So create the alias. This is going to be our 300. Sorry, this is going to be our 200. This here is going to be our 300. This here is going to be our 400. This here is going to be our 500. This here is going to be our 600. This here is going to be our 700. And then this here is going to be our 800. Okay. So when it comes to your alias, that is really all we're doing is we're just taking the scales that are inside of our brand collection and really just at the end of the day, just assigning them a role. Okay. Let's keep looking at some more examples. So if I was to duplicate this, now think about the case of like our air. Okay. Same thing. Just adjust it to the red. Red 200, red 300, red 100, red 200, red 300, red 400, red 500, 600, 700, and then our red 800. Okay, let's duplicate this again. What was the next color that we looked at? It was our green. Okay, our green is going to be our success. So here what we're going to do is we're going to apply a green. We're going to apply a green and apply the green all the way down. Really that easy at the end of the day. Nice and easy, right? Perfect. 500, 600, 700. And then we have our green 800. Then if we were to duplicate this, what's the next one that we had, which is our gray. Now our gray, because it like, the role can vary as to what that gray is for. It could be for icons. It could be for text. It could be for headings. So the way we classify that is actually a neutral. So this is a 50. This here is a 100. This here is a 200. This here is a 300. This here is a 400. This here is a 500. This here is a 600. This here is a 700. And then this here is an 800. Okay, really that simple. Then let's go into our brand. The next one is our orange. So if we were to duplicate this, this here is where we would have a warning. Okay. So our warning is our 50, warning 100, warning 200, warning 300, warning 400, warning 500, warning 600, warning 700, and then our warning 800. This connects back to that orange. If I made any mistakes here, call me out. And then let's go with our blue. So our blue is generally our information. So if I duplicate this, call this our information. Okay, so this here is our 50. This here is our 100. This here is our 200. This here is our 300. This here is our 400. This here is our 400. This here is our 500. This here is our 600. This here is our 700. And let me move my video bar out of the way. And then we're going to have our blue 800. Okay. So just like that at the end of the day. Okay. Beautiful. So now let's go into our border widths and also our border radiuses. So now let's look at our border widths and our border radiuses. So we're going to add a number variable, border widths. Sorry, let me check my cheat sheet here so I don't lead you astray. Our border width, and the one here is going to be none. Okay. So when it comes to the none value, what this is going to do is just going to be connecting back to that scale. Okay. Now for our border widths, it's like there's really no purpose for like a 100 scale because we only have a couple of them. So that's where we can start to get into something with things like small, medium, and also large. Okay. But to each their own. So that small would be a 25, which would be 1. You know, that medium might be 2, so like 2 pixels. Maybe you have like a larger component where there is a little bit of a larger border width, which would be that 100. Okay. So let's duplicate this and let's do the same thing for our border radius. Okay. So a border radius, maybe you might have a button that has that nice, crisp, clean right angle. That would be a 0. You might have, it's very rare actually to have like a 1 pixel border radius. Usually you always just have a 2. So what we're going to do, we're actually just going to delete this. This here is then going to become our small. This here might become our medium. And then we might have a large with like an 8 border radius or something like a larger card or table component. Okay. So there we have our border widths and also our border radius. So I want to cover multi-brand design systems, okay? Because your Alias collection is where those multi-brands are housed. So there's a couple different approaches to multi-brands, and it really depends on like your company, your use case as to what approach that you should follow. It's a question I get all the time. So I want to look at what's called a branded house approach first. Okay. Sorry. These are from 2 images merged into one. So your branded house approach, I set this to like 64. There we go. Sorry. Is where within one house, you have brands that are like kind of the same. Okay. So what I mean by that is if you look at Coke, Coke Zero, and Diet Coke, those colors are all going to be relatively similar, except there's just a primary color that's a little bit different. Okay. So they're going to share the same scales at a high level, but everything else, like their fonts, their border widths, border radiuses, like their success colors, those are all going to be the same. The only thing that's different is that there's just a different primary color. Okay. That is what's called a branded house approach. Now, there's also the idea of a house of brands. Okay. So this is where, if you think about the Coca-Cola company, they have all these different types of brands. So you have the 3 that we saw before that are similar, but Sprite has a completely different color scheme than Coke. Vitamin Water, Monster, Powerade, Dasani, Dr. Pepper, they all have completely separate color schemes than Coke. Okay. So their primary color, their secondary color, if they have it, their text, radiuses, all their components, everything is going to be completely different. This is what's called a house of brands. If you have a house of brands approach, my suggestion to you, have a separate design system. Okay. One for each brand. The alternative to that is what you can do is say you only have 2 completely separate brands. You would rename this to like brand Coke. Okay. And then you can simply duplicate this entire one and create a new collection called brand Sprite. Okay. So that's still within one design system, but you're just going to need to change the collections that are applied. Okay. That's my suggestion. It's the house of brands. Okay. So if I was just to go ahead and just delete this collection now, but this is far more complex. Okay. And if you're dealing with a house of brands, like get in touch with me. Like, we have some links where you can book me for some time if you do need that level of consulting. Okay. We work with house of brands all the time. But the more common use case that I work with, like that I see a lot of designers asking about, is this branded house, because everything is really just the same. So if you do have this house of brand approach, inside your Alias collection is where you're going to house that brand. So you're going to have brand 1, add another mode that's brand 2. Now, everything else is going to stay the same. Okay. But the only thing that's going to change is just the primary color. So maybe for the second brand, this primary color is going to be our red. We could then go ahead and simply just swap out the primary color. It's that easy when dealing with a multi-brand design system. Okay. Now we do have a full other video that goes a little bit more in depth on multi-brand design systems. I'm not going to do that here. Okay. But it's a question that I get all the time. It's just dealing with multi-brand design systems, the different types of multi-brand design systems that are out there. Okay. So if you're dealing with a house of brands, just inside your Alias collection, just add another mode and swap that primary color or a secondary color if you need to, right? But if you're dealing with a house of brands, oh, sorry, I think I deleted my image, get in contact with me, because there's probably a lot of other use cases and edge cases that you're not thinking about in regards to that, okay? My suggestion to you. Anyways, let's keep moving forward. So one thing I always do as well is just with inside of our neutral collection is your black and white's never really going to change. But one thing you can do, sorry, if I just remove the Coke here now, is inside your gray, what you can do is really just include like a white and just like a black if you want to, or you can just like, what I do sometimes is just like in your all variables, just like create a new variable you just call foundation, is where you just sort of have like foundation white, sorry. There we go. Foundation white, black. It doesn't really matter what you do here with some of these things. But then inside your Alias, inside that neutral is where you can also just have sort of like a white. And then also just like a black. Okay. It's really that simple at the end of the day, where we search for foundation. And again, you can also just put this inside of like an Alias foundations group, but like just for the sake of everything, just if you just put it in neutral, like it makes life a little bit easier. Okay. So foundation black. Okay, there we go. So really we have all the variables that we need inside of our alias collection now. So now I have like slides for maps, but like I think it's best if you just like, if I go through it with you and we build it together. But your mapped collection is really like the leaves of a tree. It's what everyone sees. Okay, so these are your icon variables, these are your text variables, your surface variables, and your border variables in a nutshell. Okay, so these are the things that are actually applied to a lot of your components. Now, one thing I would like to call out is not every single one of the colors that you had in your alias collection needs a real purpose in your mapped collection. What you're doing is you're selecting the specific variables that you're going to want to use for your components, even if it's just like 2 colors from a particular scale, okay? And applying them or giving them a specific role inside the mapped collection that's going to be applied to a lot of these components. Okay, so now let's start off building out our mapped collection. Now, one thing I would like to call out here, this token structure is very simple, okay? As I mentioned earlier, this series or this long video, we're not building the best looking components in the world and we're not covering every specific use case, okay? I do have more videos where we get into more complex tokenography, okay? But again, this is just getting your feet wet. It's the same that was in the series last year, okay? So our mapped collection is going to be very basic, but this can get super complex, and I will leave links on some of those more complex videos below. Okay, but I want to call that out specifically, is that this is a starter video. It's not meant for you to build the most robust design system in the world. Also, too, one thing I would like to call out is that the naming conventions that will go into your mapped collection, they can vary, and I've covered a bunch of different approaches before. I'm using a different approach to start. If you look at our collective kit that's inside of our academy, the token structure follows a little bit of a different approach, but it's more complex. Okay, I want to call that out right away just so there's no confusion. So with that preamble out of the way, let's look at our mapped collection now. Now let's go ahead. Let's create another collection. That's going to be our mapped collection. Okay, so we're going to start off with our text variables. So starting off with our text headings. Okay. So with our text headings, we're going to go into our neutral collection and maybe just apply like an 800, okay? And then we're also going to have the body. And we apply that a 700. So now we're starting to have some of those different variables for like our different like, styles and things that are actually going to go onto, or different colors that are actually going to go onto our like components and onto our text, okay? Again, as I said before, there are more complex versions of this text where we get into things like on color subtle. Those are in another video and in our academy series. But again, just getting your feet wet, this is the approach that I would follow, okay? We're also going to have an action and a text action color. Think of it like a link color. So there's a link in like your body, the paragraphs. And what I usually do for that is, let me just make sure, confirm something here, which is our 500. Now, one thing I always like to do as well is whenever I'm working within my scales, in our alias and like in our brand, whatever like that default color is instead of a 500, you can call it a default. So you already know like what your core color is that the scale was based off of. Again, it's just something I do. You don't really need to do it too if you don't want to. So this is our default, and then this here is also our default, whatever those 500s are, just so I know, okay? Anyways, so you have your text action. And because our primary like UI collective color is purple, maybe I want that link to be like a default. Okay. So, sorry, not a purple default. This should be our primary default. Thanks for calling me out behind the scenes. Always be sure to go collection to collection. Never skip over collections. Then what we're going to do is we're going to go with our action hover. So if this action element was actually hovered. So think like legitimately like a link. The link is the color, the action color is if that link is not hovered. And then when that link is hovered, what's the hover color? Okay. And when we build out these components, you're going to see what I mean. And we're also going to need a text disabled. Okay. So if that link maybe is disabled in the grand scheme of things, we can apply like a neutral 400. We're also going to need an information. So if like you have text that's in an information state, that can be our information defaults. You can have a warning. So again, a warning default. Warning. So where's our warning? Our warning defaults. You can have our success, which is our success defaults. And then you can go with an error, which is our error default. And then we're also going to need an on action. So basically what this is, again, there's a bunch of different ways that you can break this up. I have more complex ways in some of our other videos, but a great way if you're just getting started is think about an on action as if it's on color, right? So if you have text that's on a colored background, you might just want to set it to neutral, that neutral white, okay? And I think we're pretty good when it comes to our text. So these are all some of their starting text colors that we might need for our design system. And it's great because this can always scale up. So now that we have this out of the way, let's move on to our surface, our icon, and our border. So now let's look at our icons. Okay. Now, the best thing about this, if I was to duplicate this group, our text group for icons, basically all these variables can really stay the same because we want some consistency if our text is next to an icon. Like if we have warning text next to a warning icon, we want those colors to be consistent. Okay. We don't want them to be completely different because that's where we get into some different experiences. But where some things differ is we're not going to have an icon headings or an icon body. Okay. What I'm going to do, delete one of them and actually just call this our icon defaults, or our icon primary is also a term that you can use. But I find that if you're using the action hover approach and you're applying a primary, I think default is just a little bit easier to understand. Or what this is if you just have an icon resting on its own, what's the color for that icon that you want to apply? So I'm going to apply just a neutral 700 for now. But everything else is really going to stay the exact same because you want the text and icons to share the same variables. So the easiest way to deal with your icons, just duplicate the text group. So now I want to go into my surface variables here, or create surface variables, excuse me. And what we're going to start off with is actually a color for a page. Okay. Now with this, we can connect back to our neutral white because maybe we want our pages to be white. Okay. Then what we can do is also have what's called like a surface primary, or you might also know it as a surface default. But what this is really what are the colors for like key cards on a page. Okay. So in the case of what I mean by that is say we have like this dashboard here, and then which is white. Say we might have all these cards on top of it. Right. But maybe you want the cards to have some type of like subtle differentiation. So this is super light. And it's like, let me just go like a 2%. Sorry, just so you can see the difference. And that's way too dark, like a 5%, something like that. Whereas like a very subtle difference in like contrast from the background. Okay. That's the purpose of what is like that surface default. So it can be white if you want. It can be a gray. It doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. Okay. So what we're also going to need is a surface action. So what the surface action is think about a button. Okay, that's an action element. That is our surface action. So in that case, if we think back to our UI collective, our buttons are purple. So we're going to apply that default. And then we're going to apply the action hover. And in this case, what you might want to do is, again, just apply a little bit darker color. So when that button is hovered, it switches to a darker color. Now, what we're going to do now is get into like more specifics, like success, like warning, like, oops, I don't want to open that. Warning, information, okay? Error, okay? With these, if you think about like an alert as an example, and again, there's a ton of different use cases for these. Sometimes you might want multiple success colors, if it's lighter, if it's darker, depending on if you have success buttons, warning buttons, so on and so forth, okay? You might want different like groupings for these, but for the purposes of this video, let's just look at it from the point of view of alerts. Or maybe we want these colors, these background colors to be a little bit lighter. Okay. So warning 15, once we get into alert components, you might see what I mean. Our information 50 and then our error 50. Okay. Really, really, really that simple. Perfect. So there is our surface colors. I hope I didn't mess up anywhere here. And if I did, we'll come back and fix it. Again, just our starting surface colors. For now, we might come back and add some more as we go through and build out some components. But let's look at our border colors next. So now let's create a new grouping for our border. Okay, so with our border, we're going to start off with like our border, like a default, or like maybe like a primary, if you want to call it that. Doesn't really matter. But what this default is, if we think back to the example where, let me see if I still have it here on our frame, is if we have sort of these cards, right? What's sort of a standard border that's applied to a lot of elements? Okay, this can even be things like fields too. So I'm going to create this and set this to like a neutral 50. As an example. Okay, so it just offers like some very subtle differentiation between a lot of these things. So then what we can do, we can go with our like border success, information, warning, Air disabled is another big one. Actually, did I even have a surface disabled? I didn't add a surface disabled, so forgive me on that. Is we're also need a surface disabled, which might be like a neutral, like, I don't know, 100. And we're building a design system, not the best looking design system in the world. Okay. So for these, our border, if our background for some of these elements might be a little bit lighter, maybe we want our border to be a little bit darker. So this will be our success, maybe like 200, information 200, warning 200, and air 200. Okay. What else for our borders? We're also going to need an action. And our action for our buttons, I kind of like to have like that the same as I did for the surface. So if our action is a surface actions, a primary default, action hover is primary 600. I'm going to do the same for like action hover, primary 600. We're also going to need a disabled. Sorry, I skipped over the disabled before too. So maybe they're neutral, maybe like a 300. And then we're also going to need a focus. So our focus element will go around our focus components. And this is always the same as whatever that action value is. Okay. Sorry, our default. Okay, perfect. So we have a lot of our variables that we can actually, starting variables that we can use to start to build a lot of these components now. And again, this can get way more complex. I've done videos where this does get way more complex, but in the purposes of building out components, getting you started, because at the end of the day, most people just want to see how we're building components. Okay. We build components the best way here at UI Collective. A lot of other content creators take influence in how we do this. So yeah, want to cover it again. Perfect. So now that we have this out of the way, before we get into our responsive collection, let's look at what light mode and dark mode. So now, light mode, dark mode, everyone says like, oh, Kirk, like dark mode's impossible. Not really. Dark mode's probably the easiest thing that you're going to do. Okay. Because all you're doing for light mode, dark mode is you're just inversing the colors. It's that simple. So this here would be our neutral 50. This here would be our 100. This here might be our 400, but also too with dark mode, sometimes you do want some of those colors to stay the same. Okay. And if your brand is like that, what you can do inside of your alias collection, also your brand collection, is just put like a dashed fixed so that this is more like relevant for like primary colors, secondary colors, those core brand colors, things like air, success is a little bit more fluid, is you can put like a default fixed to let any designer know that that color needs to be, cannot change, okay, across dark mode. So maybe, sorry, coughing. For the purposes of this exercise, we're just going to set that to default fixed, okay? But everything else we can kind of inverse. So our neutral 400, neutral 700, again, you can kind of be like sloppy with this, right? Like it doesn't need to be super perfect because we're going to go through and test this for accessibility a little bit later on. Neutral white, our black, our icon. Sorry, feel free to skip ahead here if you really want to, but we're just going to have some fun with it. It doesn't need to be perfect. For some things, you can just sort of select another value and just see how it looks. And whenever I build dark mode to start, this is exactly what I do. Like, I'm not even kidding either. Like, sorry, your default's probably the 300, but I just go this fast and then like work our way back and start to test a lot of these components first to see how things are looking. So our success 50, 800, 800, 800, 800, neutral 700, almost there. These ones are easy. Success 200, 600. And again, just guess at the end of the day is really what you're doing. Try to get it as close to as possible, of course, but you're always going to need to go through and test for accessibility again anyway. Default fix, 600, 700, doesn't really matter. Okay. So there you have your starting point for dark mode. Okay. So we have all of our color variables out of the way. And again, this isn't the most perfect design system. It's not the best looking design system, but it's enough where you can take the learnings and apply it to your own and really like upscale it in a way. Okay. So we have our brand collection. We have our alias collection. We talked about multiple brands. We have our mapped collection that looks at light mode and also looks at dark mode as well. But what about like our fonts and stuff? So that's where we bring in the responsive collection. So our responsive collection, it basically just like houses all the variables that might change across device sizes, if that makes sense. So things like our font size, and our spacing, padding, gap, things like that. Okay, so let's start off with like our text sizes. So in order to actually go ahead and what's the word that I'm looking for? Build out our type scales. Sorry, that was so tough. It's 8:17 and I'm tired. Is I use this tool called Typescale. It's going to help us build out this type scale. Okay. So what I always do is I set our font size, basic font size to 16. And what that's going to do is whatever our basic paragraph size, it's always going to be 16. Anything lower than 16, you need to be careful from an accessibility standpoint, depending on the font that you have. 16 and above, you're always fine from accessibility standpoint, unless your font is like 1 pixel thin. Okay. But I've never seen a font that's like that. Anyways, so then we have all these different scales to choose from. I'm going to select major third to start, and then also toggle this to pixels because Figma works in pixels, not rems. Okay. Now, let's dissect this for a sec. So we have paragraph size of 16, which is what we want. We have an H6 of 20. Then we have an H5 of 25 and H4 of 31.25. But we really don't want decimals inside of Figma, do we? We want nice, crisp, clean, numbers. So what we're going to do for this is we're actually going to, using the 4-pixel grid that we had in scale, okay, apply that same concept here, where 16 to 20 goes by 4 pixels. That's perfect. But then we go to 5. What's the closest multiple of 4? 24. Then 31.25. What's the closest multiple of 4? 32. 40. 48. 60, right? These are where we get into all like how we start to actually build out the scale. It's just like round the number to the closest multiple of 4, just for consistency purposes. Okay. Now, let's go ahead and just like screenshot this. And one thing I'm also going to do as well is everyone asks about mobile. When it comes to mobile, what you can do is simply just select a smaller scale and notice how everything shifts. Okay. So I'm going to take a screenshot of this as well. Okay. There's our mobile scale. And now we can apply that same logic where things just like adjust as needed. Things don't just adjust as needed. We just have to keep applying that 4-pixel logic. So closest multiple of 4 to 47.78 is 48. So our H1 is going to be 48. Okay. That's how we get our type scales in a nutshell. Where things can get complex are things like line height and paragraph spacing. We're going to look at that too. Okay. So with the screenshots that we have, let's go into a responsive collection and start to build this out. So here I just have the screenshots I took from Typescale for like our desktop and mobile. Let's go ahead. I just created this responsive collection here, and let's just go ahead and start with our number variables, not our string variables, because I've done this before with string variables and I have to rebuild it with number variables. So don't do that. Okay. So we're going to start off with H1 and then font size. Okay. This is a way that you can approach it. There's a bunch of different ways you can do this. So like line height and then also like paragraph spacing. And what we're going to do is just duplicate this for our H2, our H3, 3, H4, our H5, and then our H6. And then what we're going to do is we're going to, for our paragraph, X small, paragraph small, paragraph medium, and our paragraph large. Okay. So just like that. And now let's go ahead and add some adjustments here. So for our H1, maybe we'll do our mobile after. So let's focus on our desktop for now. Make sure we get that down pat. So what we're going to do here is going to be, we're going to start, our closest multiple is 60 for this. I really hope I didn't mess that up. 2 is going to be our 48. Our H3 is going to be our 40. H3 is going to be our 40. H3 is going to be our 40. Our H4 is going to be our 32. Our H5 is going to be our 24. And then our H6 is going to be our 20. And then this is where we're getting into some tricky things here. Maybe if I go, largest to smallest, keep things consistent. A large, medium, small, extra small. There we go. We're cooking. Awesome. So our paragraph large in this case is going to be 20. And I know what you're saying is, Kirk, like our, I didn't properly add our H6. I know what you're saying is like our font size for H6 and our paragraph large are the same. Yes. Usually with your headings, it might be a little bit more bold to offer that level of differentiation. But anyways, I continue on. Our paragraph medium is going to be that 16. And there's different terminologies here for what you can call these things. Okay. And I've called them different things in the past. Our paragraph small, we're going to break the 4-pixel rule and actually just go with the 14. Paragraph spacing is kind of weird that way. And then something that is absolutely not accessible, but I still have it as an option for things like captions, or if I really, really need to, like terms and conditions, is like that font size of 12. Okay. So now let's look at line height. Now, when it comes to line height, is we might like adjust this a little bit later on, is what you do is you kind of take the font size and you multiply it by a multiple. Okay. 1.4, 1.6, 1.2 until you get the look and feel that you're going for. Okay. So what I mean by that is like 60 times 1.2 is 72. So in this case, our line height for H6, so if we set this to hello world, if we set this to like a 60, okay, we set this to like a 60, and we set our line height to something like 72, that's what that would look like. And it's not that half bad. Again, what was this? 60 times 1.4. If we go 60 times 1.2, maybe we might want things a little bit tighter. Or sorry, it was. You know what? That's fine before I get ahead of myself here. Okay, you can also even go a little bit tighter. So like 60 times 0.8 and have to set this to 48. But that is like a little bit too tight, I find sometimes. But it's totally up to you. Okay, so this is where you kind of need to have an idea as to like how you want to structure your type before you go ahead and do this. We're just gonna keep things simple. Go by 1.2 for now. Okay, so line height 48 times 1.2. 57.6. We're still going to apply that 4-pixel rule here. So, which it would be 56. Yes, 56. I believe I got that right. Please don't sue me if I got that wrong. Times 1.2, 48. Perfect. 32 times 1.2, 38.4, closest to 40. 24 times 1.2, 28. 20 times 1.2, 24, perfect. 20, 24, same as before. 16 times 1.2, 20. 14 times 1.2, 16. And then 12 times 1.2, 14, 16. Okay, so there we have our line height. Okay, so let's go ahead and do the same thing for mobile now before we look at our paragraph spacing. So this here is desktop. This here is mobile, okay? Just like that. One thing also that we can do inside this responsive collection is just create another variable here that we're just going to call like device size. So this is where we can specify like what these are, like 1440. Maybe this is like a 440, okay, for mobile. You can have tablet here as well, okay? So then for our mobile, okay, so we'll have 48, 48 times 1.2, 50, this would be 56, 56. This here is going to be our 40 times 1.2. I believe we already did that actually, which we did. Sorry, let me extend this in so we can see side by side. So 40 times 1.2 is 48. And then we're going to go with a 32 for our H3. So this is our 32. And that would be a 40. It's kind of nice when the numbers work like this. H4 is going to be a 28. I think we already... I don't think we did a 28 yet. 20, 16, 20, 24, 28. No, I don't think we did. I hope I didn't mess up anywhere in here, but forgive me if I did. 28 times 1.2. So this is going to be our 32. There we go. Oh yeah, I messed up here. I'm trying to go quick, so forgive me. Our H5 is our 24. 24 times 1.2. So these actually stay the exact same. Our H5, which is nice. Okay. And then let's go with our H6. So 20, and then this also stays the same. And then everything else can stay the same. Now, a great rule of thumb is all your paragraph sizes should stay the exact same on mobile as they are on desktop. You should not change your paragraph sizes at all. Okay. So there we have our desktop and also our mobile. One thing too, when it comes to paragraph spacing, there's no like true rule behind it. Okay. it's totally up to you how you want to structure these things. So like set this something like 24, maybe for your headings, maybe you want it something like 64 as paragraph spacing. So maybe it'll be 64, and this might also be like 64. Maybe going down, maybe you want to go with like a 48 and also like a 48. There's no like true rule of thumb when it comes to paragraph spacing. Okay. You kind of just got to like see how much spacing you like to have between some of your paragraph sizes. So maybe this one's 32, maybe this is 32. Paragraph spacing here, maybe this is 20 and this is 20. And maybe this is, 20 and also 20. So just do what you think looks good for your brand at the end of the day. Paragraph spacing, maybe we'll set this like 24 or 20. Let's keep it at 20 for now. We might come back, change it a little bit later. 20, 20, 20, 20, 20, and then our 20, and then also our 20. There we go. Okay. So then there we have our responsive collection, but we're not done just yet. Is there still this concept of like responsive variables, or what I call like jumper variables? And we filmed a video on it last year. This is also included in like our original Build a Design System series, but it's something I still want to cover again. So let's take a look at that next. So sorry, I changed my mind. I think it actually might make sense for us to start to build out those jumper variables once we actually get into like building out our components. It might make a little bit more sense. It's a really advanced topic. Like even when I'm working with clients, it's something they really struggle to understand is how your jumper variables are supposed to work. So maybe we'll loop back to that a little bit later on. But one thing I might want to do here now, let's get rid of those things here, is let's start building out the actual text styles. It's going to go into our components here. Okay, this is going to be super tedious. I know it's going to be annoying, but it is what it is. Okay, so let's start with our H1, our H2, our H3. Actually, we'll just start with that for now. I think I might have a little bit of a hack here for us, where we're going to apply the variable for our H1, which is going to be our 60, and our line height. Line height is going to be 72. We can add paragraph spacing here if we want to, but I'm just not going to do that. And then this here is going to be our headings. And then this here is going to be, what do we want to do here? Let's apply the variable. Let's maybe go with our font weight. They will go with like a semi-bold. Okay. So then what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead, create the style of this. That's going to be our H1. Really that simple at the end of the day. Actually, maybe I'm just trying to think here. I think maybe what we can do is to maybe sort of spruce things up a bit no, I think maybe we'll leave it like this for now. Again, just because this is like supposed to be like a simple video. Because what you can also do is you can also have like H1 semi-bold, H1 bold, H1 medium, but I think that might be a little bit too complex for now. So what we're going to do then is just detach this. Let's set this to our H2, and let's set this to our H2 font size and our H2 line height. Oops, sorry, I don't think I did that right. H2 font size, H2 line height. And let's go ahead and create the style of that. Let's call that our H2. Okay, then let's detach this, set this to our H3 font size, H3 line height, and let's create the style of this that we're going to call H3. And we'll call this H3. There we go. Let's call this our H4. Let's detach, set this to our H4 font size. God, sorry, I gotta keep remembering to like actually select. This is going to be our font size and then our line height. There we go. And let's call this our H4. Let's then duplicate this, detach, call this our, oops, sorry. God, I'm all over the place. This is going to be our H5 font size, H5 line height. And let's call this our H5. But we need to call this our H5. There we go. Now let's call this our H6, select, detach. There we go. Did it right this time. Our line height, there we go. And now here is our H6. There we go. So now that we have that out of the way, let's now look at like our paragraph. And again, with our paragraph, this can be really where we like break things out into a bunch of different styles, right? So what I mean by that is, let's see how we want to handle things here. You know what? I think maybe for our body is we might actually we'll do something a little bit more exciting. So we might have like our um small link, small link, um, and then also our small semi-bold. Sorry, small semi-bold, semi-bold. From now we're going to look at like our paragraph sizing. So with this, there should also be an extra small actually. So what we're going to do here, sorry, let me bring this all down. So we'll actually get rid of these and work our way up this time. Okay. So this here, we're going to apply our body. And for this, maybe just want to apply like that regular. Okay. And what we're going to do here is we're going to set our body, our paragraph sizing. Where's our extra small, font size, line height. There we go. Let's go ahead and create the sizing of this. This is going to be our body, small. Okay, let's duplicate this. Let's detach. And what we can do here is we can actually just add an underline if we want to. And this is going to be our body. Sorry, this should be our body extra small. Sorry about that. Thanks for calling me out behind the scenes. X small link. Okay, and let me just rename this to X small. And we can actually just duplicate this and set this to our semi-bold by changing some of the items that are actually in here. So this is probably an easier way for us to do it actually, but our font weight, semi-bold, there we go. But it's kind of nice for us to see how everything comes about. So we have our extra small semi-bold, and then we have our extra small, which is sort of like our regular. That's one way to approach it. So we have our small link, let me make sure to do this way, extra small link, extra small semi-bold, and our extra small sort of regular. Okay, so let's now group these together. Let's detach, and detach. And for each of these, what we can do is just set this to small 14 and also that line height of that small. So now what we can do, let's try to say X small. Sorry, I'm all over the place here. Forgive me. It is late in the day. So what we can do now is this will become our body small link. This is going to become our body small semi-bold. This is going to become our body small. There we go. We're in some good shape. So let's select each of these. There we go. Let's detach, and then detach. Select all these. Select that next size up, which is that font size medium and that line height of medium. There we go. Let's call this our medium, and then medium. And let's go ahead and start creating some of the styles here. So this is our body, medium, semi-bold. There you go. Body, medium, link. And then lastly, sort of our large size. Okay, let's make sure we did this right. There we go. Perfect. And this here is going to be our large, and our large. So let's just, sorry, let's not do that. Let's detach, and let's detach. So this here is going to be our large paragraph size, font size large, and then our line height. Okay, perfect. So now let's go ahead and create the style. Come on, body large link, body large, and then body large, semi-bold. Let's just check out the styles. Things look okay. If I made any mistakes here, feel free to call me out. Medium semi-bold, medium link. They want to put the link actually at the, let's try to think about how we want to rearrange this. Put our extra smalls first, and then our semi-bold, then our link, our small, semi-bold, then our link, medium, semi-bold, then link, large, semi-bold, and then link, just the way we can structure it a little bit. Okay. And one thing we can also do is just put these inside of a group as well. that we're just going to call our headings. So now we have the variables applied inside of our actual styles themselves. Okay. So again, if I made any mistakes there, I apologize. But now we have everything that we need to actually start going ahead and building out our components. I'm actually using the material icon library. Okay, it has all these great icons that just come in as local components. So I'm just using material for my icons, but you can really use any icon library that you would like. And I just put the icons inside of my design system file. So we're going to start with our button, but one thing we might want to do is we might just want to color scope our variables, okay? So basically what this is doing is it's hiding certain variables that like we might not necessarily need, right? So within primary, I'm not going to want any of these, so I can choose to edit these variables, and I can choose to show these or not when I'm actually applying components, okay? So now like these variables here won't be shown when I'm applying certain components. I'm applying the colors to components, sorry. And even with brand as well, what we can do is just go into our all variables here and just hide all the ones that aren't necessarily going to be used, which is all of these really. Yeah, even the scale too. Actually, you know what? We'll leave the scale in, and I'll say why in just a sec. So we'll take out our purple. These we're not going to need, and we'll leave in our scale. Okay, so let's edit these variables. Just choose not to show these. There we go. And also too, one thing we can do is we can go back into Alias. Let's go ahead. Let's edit these variables. What is this? This is border width. So one thing we can do is just toggle this on and choose to only show this in that stroke. Okay. So you can even, we'll do the same with border radius as well. It just helps us to scope our colors pretty well. So now when I go and apply these variables, I don't have to scroll through all the variables that I had before. It's just like, let me show you what I mean, honestly. So let's go ahead and just add in that radius. So now when I select radius, notice how border radius is always there. Okay, sure, we have our scale. And the reason why I'm leaving in the scale is because if you want to get specific around applying variables for padding and gap and things like that, the scale is always nice to have. But yeah, not really recommended not really mandatory, sorry, to have your scale showing at all times. But notice how with border radius now, I don't need to scroll through all the variables. It's right there. Okay, perfect. Awesome. So with that out of the way, now we'll start with our button. Okay, so with our button, what we're going to do, just put in something like join UI collective, just some basic text here. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to press Shift A. Okay, and that's going to add that auto layout frame. One thing I want to make sure, okay, so perfect. This is set to our body medium, which is that 16 size frame. Okay, or 16 size text. Let's go ahead and add in some variables now. So let's go ahead, add in just a surface action, and we're going to set our text to our text on action, because again, our on action is sort of signifying that it's on that background. There are more complex ways to handle this. I've covered it in the past, but that's what we're rolling with for now. And we're going to use our text on action probably quite a lot. So I'm actually just going to go into our maps, move our text on action way up here. There we go. So let's also go ahead, add in a stroke. Now, oftentimes what I see a lot of designers do is, even if their stroke is the same color as their surface, they just choose not to add a stroke. But it kind of puts you in a box then, because if you do decide you need to add a stroke, what you have to do is you have to go back and add it to all your components a little bit later. So just, even if it's the same, just add it. It doesn't hurt anyone. Okay, so let's also go into our assets panel and let's search for like our info icon. There we go. So we can pull that in here. We can shrink this to like 20 by 20. There we go. And let's also set 12, sorry, our horizontal padding to 12 and 8. Keep things nice and snug. There we go. Okay, sorry. And let's set this to our icon on action. I'm going to do the same for our icon actually as well. Move our on action up. Okay. So now our icon and our text have the exact same color. Okay. So let's go ahead and let's add in also a radius too, like maybe a radius of 2. Sorry. We're going to call this our button. Let's go ahead, maybe adjust the gap to something like 8. Let's create the component of this and let's get started from here. Okay. So before we go ahead and add in our variants, let's go ahead and add in some properties here. So if we look at this button, we're not going to need an icon left and an icon right at every time. We might just want an icon left. We just might want an icon right. We might not want an icon at all. So what we're going to do to start is we're going to add a layer property here that we're going to call icon left. Okay, so let me just copy that as well. And now what we want to do, so if I bring this instance out, okay, now I can hide that icon left. But I also want the option to swap that icon because I'm not always going to need an info icon. So with that, I'm going to add an instance swap here in the top right. Also call it icon left. But what I like to do is add a little emoji. And to do this, I did edit emojis and symbols. I'm on a Mac. I know there's a hotkey for it, but sorry, I'm old school. And I like to add this sort of downward arrow. Okay. So let's create that property. And now I can easily swap out that icon for another type of icon. You know, there's just an example. Perfect. So we're also going to want to do the same for icon rights. So let's add in a layer property for icon rights. So icon right. There we go. Let's also create a instance swap for that icon rights. And again, we add the downward facing arrow because we can't have two properties with the same name. It kind of shows like one is like nested within the other, just using that arrow. You'll see what I mean here, sort of like icon left, right? Anyways, I digress. And then lastly is we're going to need a text property for the label to easily change that. So let's just call that label. So now we can easily swap this out as well. So there we have our initial button component. But let's go ahead and also start adding some variants now. So let's go ahead and let's start off with so this is going to be our status. So this here is going to be our default button. And then this here is going to be our hover button. So let's go with the surface action and then surface action hover, our border action hover. And we're going to keep our text icon on action and text on action the same. You can have on action properties for that. I have tutorials in our academy where I go through that level of complexity, but we're going to leave it like that for now and maybe only just change our surface and background. And just getting started at this early stage, sometimes it can be a little bit confusing if you do have on action hovers. Okay. Again, we can introduce that if we want to, but we're not going to do that here just for simplicity's sake. Okay. And this here is then also going to be our hover. Moving along now is we're going to need a focus element. Is what our focus element is for is if you've ever actually used like navigated a website via like a tab key. Okay. So basically what this does is allows those who are more visually impaired to sort of see what's selected if they're navigating a website just via a tab key. Okay. It's what's called a focus. You don't need to have these in Figma, but I build them in Figma just so my developers can see. Okay. So when it comes to my focus, what I do is I set the width to 2 pixels because I want it to be nice and noticeable. Okay. And again, I just copied my default because the default and the focus should always, as just as best practice purposes, should always have roughly similar variables. Okay. I'm going to set this to our border focus. So this is why we have that border focus. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to simply copy and paste it inside. And I know what you're saying, Kirk, like that's not right. Like what? Now, what I'm going to do actually is bring this around 2 pixels on either side. Okay, let's set the radius of this to 4. Radius of 8 maybe. Let's actually go radius of 2. Yeah, radius of 2 is fine. Maybe even radius of 4. I still think it looks a little bit too square, but it's okay. We're not building the best looking design system in the world. We're just building a design system. Okay. So now we have that focus property all the way around. But if I was to change this label, learn more, what do we notice? Is that the focus doesn't adjust with it. And so what we need to do is actually set our constraints here with the focus selected to left and right and top and bottom. And now with those constraints set, notice how whenever I adjust this to maybe just something like hello, notice how that focus property always like follows with it. Okay. Beautiful. So there we have our focus. I just need to take a quick drink of water, but then we're going to look at our disabled and start looking at some other variants as well. Okay, so I'm back. Let's go ahead and let's build our disabled now. So for our disabled, we're just applying our disabled properties. There's a bunch of different ways that I've handled this in the past, as I'm sure you might know, but really what we're doing is just applying our disabled. And again, it's not the best looking disabled button in the world. You know what? Just for my own sake, what we're going to do is we're actually going to set our surface disabled to something just a little bit lighter. There we go. And maybe even our border disabled too. Oops. There we go. It just looks less harsh. And maybe we actually might even want to put our text disabled also a little bit darker. Maybe just like that default color. And also our icons to match. Sorry, this is me just getting picky now. I really didn't like the look of that disabled. There we go. Okay. So there's just a disabled button. Anyways, let's continue on. Perfect. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and let's add in another variant that we're going to call type. And this here is also going to be our default. Now for your type variants is where we can get a little bit more like finicky with it. This one is going to be our outline. Okay. So with our outline, what we're going to do is we're just going to drop the surface on each of these. But first, let's set our icon on action to our, sorry, I'm going to take this one at a time, actually. So let's drop the surface, keep the border on the outside, but then our icon on action is going to become our icon action, and our text on action is going to become our text action, okay? And then let's simply drop the surface again, and let's just set our icon on action to our icon action hover and our text on action to our text action hover. And now we're going to do the same for our focus as we did with our defaults. So drop, change our icon to icons action, and then our text action. And I noticed a spelling mistake here. Sorry, icons, not icon. There we go. And then for disabled, we're just going to keep that the same just because I like my disabled like relatively similar in terms of consistency. Okay. Perfect. And then lastly, one thing we can also do as well is, sorry, for these, what I'm going to want to do is actually just add in a fill for these. Sorry, that's my mistake. That's just going to be our surface default. Okay. Because again, these are our outline, not our transparent. And then for these, what we're going to do, because these are going to be our full-on transparent buttons, what we're actually going to do is we're not going to have any of that fill. And then we're also going to remove the border around the outside, okay? So I hope that makes sense. So here we have our defaults full of color. Here we have our outlines, which have that white background to it. And if I change the page background here, hopefully you can see what I mean. And then we have our transparent here, okay, which doesn't have any of that white background, okay? So it looks like we have some conflicting variable names here. So let's see what's that happening. So this should still be also our type. So this should be our transparent, and that should clear up any duplicates. Beautiful. So there we have. It's a simple button component, but it's a great starting component for you to go and make tweaks. Again, not every use case you might need. You might not need a transparent. You might not need an outline. And again, we go through more complex like options of this on our academy where we get in different sizing, things like subtle buttons and like things like success and error. But this is a great starting component for you. So now let's work on our label component, and our label component is going to go on top of things like our field and other components that would necessarily like need a label. Now, we separate our label component out because what it allows us to do is create variants for the label that we can actually swap out on an input component to avoid like a ton of other components for our input later on. Anyways, you're going to see what I mean. So make sure this is set to our body medium. And then set this to our text body. And let's go into our assets panel and search for like a help icon. Now, one thing we might do later is like come back and swap this out on the label for our actual tooltip component. But anyways, we're going to continue with this for now. Set that to our icon action. And let's go ahead, add some auto layout. Let's make sure that our properties here are set to hug and hug for our label. And let's center align left that label property as well. And maybe we can set the gap to 8 and we'll leave horizontal and vertical padding both set to 0. Let's go ahead, let's call this label. And let's go ahead and create the component of this. Now, if we think back to our button, what's some properties that we might need here? First off, label property or text property for the label. So we easily swap that out. So now I can change this to something like first name really easily with just a click. And we're also going to want the option to hide the icon. But are we going to want the option to swap out the icon? If it's a label, would you really ever want an icon besides like the help icon for some type of information? Chances are probably not. So we're going to leave that as is for now. Okay. But what's one thing that we noticed here when we toggle on and off the icon? It's like our frame shrinks a bit. And it's because our icons out of the box are pretty large at 24 by 24. So again, as we did with the button, we'll shrink them to 20 by 20. So now when we toggle these on and off, there we have it, okay? Perfect. So there's our label out of the way. And one variant we're going to want to add here is this here is going to be, it's going to be just our type. This here is going to be our defaults. And this one here is actually going to be our required. So what we're going to do with required is we're actually going to add a small asterisk, okay? Small asterisk, set that to our text error, or sorry, our icon error, excuse me, best to stay consistent, icon error on the inside, okay? But what we're going to do is if we think about a label, all of a sudden, if we were to like change the component, say you have like two form fields stacked on top of each other, all of a sudden the asterisk is going to push the label further to the right, and it's going to look a little bit wonky. So what we're actually going to do is if I add back in, actually probably don't need a guide there, so I don't know why I did that, is we're actually going to absolute position this, okay? Just simply to the left, just like that. So the asterisk is actually going to come in front of the label. It is not going to be inside the frame itself, but just absolute positioned outside, okay? So that's going to allow us to keep all the labels in line with one another. Now, a question I get all the time is, Kirk, can't the asterisk just go at the end? But for accessibility purposes, what you're going to want to have happen is for a user to see that the field is required and then see the field name, okay? Just best practice from accessibility, okay? So there we have our required. Beautiful. So with our label out of the way, let's look at our input and then also our field. So we're actually going to start off with our field and then our input. Now, for our field here, let's go ahead and just so let's set this something like placeholder. Just add some text and set this to our text body. Okay. And then what we're going to do is just add in two icons. So again, maybe we can add in this help outline icon and then maybe also person or profile icon or user. Let's see what comes back with user. Or let's go with a smiley face. It doesn't really matter for now because we can swap it out either way. Okay. What we are going to do here is we're going to select each of these, add some auto layout. Okay, let's make sure that this is set to hug and hug to start and set the gap to just like something like 12 or 8. So it's very similar to our button. Let's go ahead. Let's add in some padding here. So like 12 and then also 8. And let's add in a quick stroke just so you can start to visualize some things. Okay, so it's going to be our border default. And let's add in our surface, which is going to be our surface default. Now, if you think about like an input field, okay, you know, it might have a placeholder that's like first name. It might have a placeholder that's like name or email. What's awkward about this is that these icons are not in line. Okay, so very similar to what we just looked at with the label. It's best to keep like related elements in line with each other. So what we're going to do is actually just always set this to fill. So it's always going to push this icon at the right to the right. Simple, right? So let's call this field, and let's also add in a radius here of something like 2 pixels. And sorry, I should also set a border width. Use my variables to set that to 1. And there we go. Things are looking in some pretty good shape. And also for consistency purposes, I don't like the 24 by 24. I want it 20 by 20 just to keep things nice and snug. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's create the component of this. And now let's add in some properties here. So now this is looking a little bit more like a field. So let's start off with our icon. Let's go ahead. Let's add an icon left. There we go. And also add an instant swap for that icon left. But of course, add that downward facing arrow where I put edit emojis and symbols. Add the downward facing arrow. There we go. Icon left. Create the property. Let's do the same. And again, make sure you're doing this on the main component because you can't do it on the instance of the components. So let's add for our icon right. There we go. And then add in a property for that icon right. There we go. So now we have our icon left, icon right 2. Oops, something went astray here. So sorry about that. Forgive me. So this should actually be our icon right. Sorry. And let's make sure we rearrange these. So this is no longer not used in the component. Sorry, I was going to start from scratch here. So we have our icon right, and now let's add in our instant swap for that icon right. Sorry, my mistake. Silly mistakes. It's the morning here. Need more coffee. There we go. Perfect. So now that should work as intended. Perfect. Now, of course, we're also going to want a text property for the first name, or not for the first name, sorry, for the label. There we go. So now on our instance, okay, we have our icon left, icon right, and then also our label. Perfect. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and add in some variants. So let's go ahead. Let's add in our first hover effects. Actually, because these are kind of long, maybe we'll just go downwards this time. Okay. So let's go with our, first off, this is going to be our status. So this is going to be our defaults. And then this here is going to be our hover. So when it comes to our hover, what I like to do is just set our border default to our border action hover. You can also change the icons if you want, but when it comes to the surface, what's kind of nice is maybe even have like an action hover too. Okay, so action hover, it can even be like action hover 2 or action hover light. Okay, so with that, let's just set it's like a 50, and then this one, of course, like the darker one for dark mode. So what we can do now is we can get like a surface action hover light, sort of adds sort of like makes it stand out a little bit more that something's being hovered. Okay, you can play around with it. I know it doesn't look great as it stands right now, but you can also set it to like a certain, like your icon on action or like a darker version of that. So it's not so harsh, if you know what I mean. So like even like an icon action hover, like a text action hover, that's you have that option to do that too. And I don't think that looks half bad at the end of the day. Okay, so there's our hover effect. And again, you can also go ahead. Yeah, enough of that. Is go ahead and add like a while hovering, you're going to change it to hover. Okay. Let's also go ahead and let's add in also our focus. So this can be very similar to what we did with our button. It's just 2 pixels all the way around. Add a stroke, border width of 2 pixels. Drop the fill, set this to our border focus. Okay, there we go. Copy and then paste it all the way around. Again, use your absolute positioning tool. There we go. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Then we have our 1, 2. So we can set those constraints again, remember, to left and right, and also on top and bottom. And we'll set the radius to something like 4. Okay, so there we have our focus. And then lastly, let's do our disabled. So when it comes to our disabled, let's go with a surface disabled, border disabled, icon disabled, and then our text disabled. There we go. And then there is our disabled field. Okay, so there, I think we're in some pretty good shape for our field. So one thing I also covered in our legacy series is the idea of like a state. Okay, so whether it's filled or not filled. So that this here is going to be not filled. This here, these ones here can be if this is filled. Basically what this is saying is that sometimes what you might want to have here is if we go into our variables and into our text, you might want to have like a body placeholder, okay? And with that, you tend to get a little bit of like a lighter shade, so maybe like a 400, where on your not filled, maybe these are a little bit lighter, okay? So these are your text placeholder. So something's like filled versus not filled, like you've entered text versus not entered text, okay? It's a little bit more of an advanced topic, and there's a lot of other things that you can do with that, but that's just touching at a nutshell for now. The state is not filled, or if that field is actually filled itself. So now what we're going to do is we're going to work on our input, okay? So with your input, what you're doing is just taking your label property, okay? Just a copy of it, and then also a copy of like one of your fields, and just pasting it below. And we're sort of piecing the two together. So maybe for this, we want to hide both the icons just to keep it nice and clean, okay? Let's group these in an auto layout, set that to something like 8, okay? And let's go ahead and let's create the component of this and call this our input. Now, one thing you might want to do as well is also just add in like placeholder text here. Placeholder text. You can also create the component of this placeholder text if you would like to, okay? But I'm not going to do that for now. You can do that if you'd like to, if you want like more control over your placeholder text. We're just going to set this to hug and also to hug, or sorry, fill and hug vertically. This to our text body. There we go. And let's go ahead and just add in some nested instances to start. So what nested instances are is if we look at our field component here, if I was to click on this field component, notice how I have access to all these properties. But if I click on our input component, notice how all of those properties are now gone. Okay, so we're going to want the option here to toggle on all the great properties that we had before. So to do that, we just hit, we'll do that again slowly. So properties, nested instances, then toggle on label and field. So now when I hit this, notice how I have retained all the properties from our components inside of these components, right? But what's something else is that we might not always want this placeholder text. So let's go ahead and add in a layer property for placeholder text, or what's the word I'm looking for? Explainer text. Explainer text is probably a better term for it. Explainer text, or hint text. Sorry, that's the word that I'm going to use. Sorry to throw you for a loop there. So this here is going to be our hint text. There we go. And now I can also toggle on and off that hint copy if I'd like to. And of course, one thing we're also going to want is a text property, sorry, for that hint text. And again, just because we can't have two properties with the exact same name, what we're going to do is add in that downward facing arrow here. There we go. So hopefully that shows how you can like use components that we built in order to combine them together to build other components. Now that concept's actually called like atomic design. It's a guy named Brad Frost, who's also a design system expert, who like came up with that concept. I'm going to cover that topic a little bit more in depth in a future video, so be sure to like subscribe for that. But now we have this completed input component. So again, we added hint text, we added our label component, our field component, combined those together, and we added our nested instances here as well. So now we can toggle everything on and off. And hopefully this also shows you like why it's a pretty good idea to have a label as a separate component and not just included in an input, as I see a lot of people do. Because now we have like a lot of control over that label, whether it's default or whether it's required. Okay, we don't need necessarily different variants for our input field. Now, one thing we might want to do is just hide this hint text by default. And you can also get creative with this, okay? Like if you do have certain inputs, this can just sort of be, your type, then maybe this is your defaults. But you can also get into specific use cases, okay? So this here might be email, and with your email, maybe like that button is actually hidden, or that icon's actually hidden, and then you have an icon left with, with something like a mail. There we go. So you can use that to sort of set all like these different, variants for different fields that you might need for your components. And you can set this to something like email, and then there you go. And of course, you can always toggle on and off these different icons and all the different properties still. Okay, so I'll leave that to you to get creative around what kind of like properties you want for your input component, or what variants you want for your input component. But here's a great starting point. So now let's go ahead and let's build out our menu component. So it's going to look pretty similar to the setup, at least, to a lot of like the other items. So it's going to be like our other components we might have built so far. So it's going to be our menu item. Let's go ahead and add in just maybe like I don't know, like a settings, like a gear. No, it's not there. Okay, we're gonna add a person, and then also like a arrow. Whatever, it doesn't really matter what icons we use. So let's go ahead, add in some auto layout, and something got all messed up there. Okay, so let's just ignore that. Let's ungroup that, and then let's go ahead and do this again. So let's add some auto layout, and then we're going to set this to something like 12 as a gap. Again, make sure that this is set to hug and left center align. Okay, so we're going to build our menu item, and the menu item is going to be combined into like one menu component, if that makes sense. So very similar to what we looked at with our placeholder is like we're always going to want, not our placeholder, sorry, our field is we're always going to want the icon right to always be at the end. So we can set that to fill and make sure it's set to our text body. There we go. And we're going to set this to something like 12 and then also something like 8 vertically. Let's add in a quick fill. which is going to be our surface defaults. We're not going to add in a radius. Let's also add in a stroke, maybe just on the bottom, and a border defaults. And again, just on the bottom. So always be sure to set that as 1 pixel. And then just on the bottom. And you're going to see why we set that just on the bottom as well. So let's call it, is this our dot menu item? Okay. And we set this as like as dot menu items because when we publish this component, ideally, like it won't get published. And adding that period in front of it sort of signifies to Figma that, hey, we don't want to publish this. Okay. So let's then go ahead and, so there's our initial menu item. But again, we're going to need to add in some properties here. So starting off with our icon left. There we go. Create the property. And then also an icon left as well. Add in that downward facing arrow. Sorry, I know you can't probably see this part, but icon left, create the property, and then also an icon right. Oops, sorry, need to do it on the main component. Oops, there we go. Icon right, and drop the arrow that I copied in. There we go, because we got to add that on the instance swap. And then create the property again, icon right for the instance swap. Beautiful. So things are looking good. And of course, we're going to need a text property for that label. Okay. There we go. Just like that. Now, so there's our initial menu item, but let's go ahead and add in some variants here. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's start creating some variants here. So of course, we're going to need a hover, and this here is going to be our status. And this here is going to be our default. So for this, what we have is set this to our border action, and our surface is going to be our surface action hover light. And maybe we just want to keep like those, like the same colors and the same colors. Actually, you know what? What the heck? Let's set it to our icon action hover and our text action hover as well, just for consistency purposes. And also we're needed disabled. Okay. So with our disabled, what we're going to do, again, you guessed it, surface disabled, border disabled, icon disabled, text disabled. And there we have it. Okay. So now that we have that out of the way, is you could introduce like another variant, which is going to be called like it can be a state, it can be a type, doesn't really matter. And our first is going to be unselected, because you think about a menu, you might always have one option that's selected and one option and one option that's selected and all the others are not selected, right? So then these here are going to be our selected variants. So with our selected variants, again, this is going to be our surface action. Again, sort of signify that it's selected. This is going to be our border action, and then our icon on action, and then our text on action. So that's as if like that menu item specifically is selected, okay? And now it's going to be our surface action hover and our border action hover. And then this is going to become our icon on action, and then our text on action. And then there's also like our disabled is going to stay the same. Okay. And when I check, there's no overlaps in componentry. So I think we're off to a pretty good start. Okay. So now what we're going to do is let's start piecing together the menu component. Now let's piece together a menu component. So I'm going to take our menu item here. And something strange just happened where you can see it all of a sudden it added a border on all sides. When on our component here, we only have a border on the bottom. I haven't seen that one before. And it did it again. So I think we're witnessing a Figma bug in real time here. So we're just going to proceed. One thing I had done is I just increased the size of our padding like horizontally just to give ourselves some more room. And I just hid the icon left in the layers here. So it's still there. I just hid it. So let's go ahead and just add in a bunch. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then 8. And maybe we can just go ahead and just hide a couple. Okay. And we'll just set one to selected. Okay. So let's call this our menu. And now one thing you might want to do as well, and I think just the fact that it might get a little weird with the fact that we have borders on all sides now with our menu item. But anyways, what you should realistically do is add in a stroke. Okay. So this would be like our border defaults. And one thing you can do is add in this quick scroll bar. So how to do that is I just add in this scroll bar looking thing, set it to like your border default, set the radius to something like round, and add an auto layout frame, call this your scroll bar. You can create the component if you want to have that level of control. We're not going to do it here. But then inside your menu items is you're actually going to add them inside of a frame. Okay, so Shift A to add them inside of a frame. And then inside the parent menu, you're going to paste that in. So now you can see we sort of have two frames here, one with the menu items and then one with just the scroll bar. And then using, what's the word I'm looking for? Auto layout, you can just set it side to side. Okay, and we can even just set this to something like 8 and then 8 just to achieve the look that you're going for. So then set this to fill. So this is just sort of showing here that like if it's a menu that's scrollable, multiple options, you can do that too. And then maybe we can set the radius here to 2. And it might look a little weird just because we shouldn't have like the border on the right. But anyways, and sorry, I should probably set the apply a variable for our border width. Let's create the component of this. And you can also just toggle on, have an option to show scroll bar or not. Oops. By adding in a layer property for scroll bar. There we go. So we can turn that on and off, but we still lost all our great properties that we set with our menu items. So let's go into our properties and our nested instances and just simply toggle all of those on. There we go. So now I can see on our menu, we have all those great components of great properties, and perfect. There is our menu item with a live Figma bug. So now let's piece together a menu component. So I'm going to take our menu item here. And something strange just happened where you can see it all of a sudden added a border on all sides. When on our component here, we only have a border on the bottom. I haven't seen that one before. And it did it again. So I think we're witnessing a Figma bug in real time here. So we're just going to proceed. One thing I had done is I just increased the size of our padding like horizontally just to give ourselves some more room. And I just hid the icon left in the layers here. So it's still there. I just hid it. So let's go ahead and just add in a bunch. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then 8. And maybe we can just go ahead and just hide a couple. Okay. And we'll just set one to selected. Okay. So let's call this our menu. And now one thing you might want to do as well, and I think just the fact that it might get a little weird with the fact that we have borders on all sides now with our menu item. But anyways, what you should realistically do is add in a stroke. Okay, so this would be like our border defaults. And one thing you can do is add in this quick scroll bar. So how to do that is I just add in this scroll bar looking thing, set it to like your border default, set the radius to something like round, and add an auto layout frame, call this your scroll bar. You can create the component if you want to have that level of control. We're not going to do it here. But then inside your menu items is you're actually going to add them inside of a frame. Okay, so Shift A to add them inside of a frame. And then inside the parent menu, you're going to paste that in. So now you can see we sort of have two frames here, one with the menu items and then one with just the scroll bar. And then using, what's the word I'm looking for? Auto layout, you can just set it side to side. Okay, and we can even just set this to something like 8 and then 8 just to achieve the look that you're going for. So then set this to fill. So this is just sort of showing here that like if it's a menu that's scrollable, multiple options, you can do that too. And then maybe we can set the radius here to 2. And it might look a little weird just because we shouldn't have like the border on the right. But anyways, I'm sorry, I should probably set the apply a variable for our border width. Let's create the component of this. And you can also just toggle on, have an option to show scroll bar or not. Oops. By adding in a layer property for scroll bar. There we go. So we can turn that on and off, but we still lost all our great properties that we set with our menu items. So let's go into our properties and our nested instances and just simply toggle all of those on. There we go. So now I can see on our menu, we have all those great components of great properties, and perfect. There is our menu item with a live Figma bug. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's bring in just a check icon for our checkbox to start. And you know what we like to do? We like to set this by 20 to 20. And let's go ahead and just add some auto layout around it. There we go. Maybe set this to something like 8, and then also like 8. Okay, so let's call this our checkbox. And what we're going to do is we're going to add in a surface action and also a stroke, which is our border action. And we're actually going to set it on the outside and also this time to just 1 pixel for now. I always like to have my checkbox, the border, go on the outside just to make it a little bit like bigger. But as again, that's just personal preference. You don't need to do it if you don't want to. And we're going to set that radius to 4 and set our icon default to our icon on action. Okay, so things are looking pretty good for our checkbox. And again, you can play around with this if you want to. If you think the check is a little bit proportionally small, you can set that to 4 and 4 if you'd like, but I like my checkbox is just a little bit big. So here it's 36 by 36, and we're going to roll with that for now. Okay, so let's go ahead. Let's create the component of this. And now let's go ahead. Let's add in some variants here. So we're actually going to go horizontal this time. So for this here is going to be our status to start. This here is going to be, so we have our default, and then we're going to have here our hover. So for our hover, we're going to go with our surface action hover, and then our border action hover, and our icon on action is going to stay the same. And we're also going to need a focus. Okay, so this is going to be pretty similar to what we did a little bit earlier on. We're going to add in that stroke, add in a fill, set this to our border focus radius, which is going to be our border width, 2 pixels on the outside. So it's going to place this all the way around. And again, you're going to want to use your absolute positioning tool or ignore auto layout to just place that 2 pixels all the way around. There we go. Set those constraints to left and right and top and bottom and set that radius to something like 8. There we go. So let's see, 2 pixels, 2 pixels, 2 pixels, 2 pixels. There we go. And then there we have our focus. And then lastly, we're going to need to work with our disabled. We're going to go with the surface disabled, border disabled, and then our icon disabled. Okay. So there we have our disabled icon. Okay. Or our disabled checkbox. And then these are ultimately going to become our selected checkboxes. Okay. So now let's move on to our unselected checkboxes and then also add in the label to this checkbox. So one thing before I actually get into this selected versus unselected that you can also do if you really want to is if something's in an error state. So you can set this to status error, where you set this to your surface error, border error, and then also like your icon error. You have that option to do that as well if you'd like to. And you can sort of get, funky. And we go into, in our academy courses, we go a little bit more in depth into like things like how to build this out properly, like all the different types for errors and stuff. But anyways, we'll leave that as just an option for now. And what we're going to do now is let's go ahead and let's add in a new variant here that we're going to call type. And these first ones here are going to be selected. And these here are going to be our unselected. There we go. Selected and unselected. Now for each of these, what we're going to do is just simply get rid of that icon altogether. Okay. And now we can make some adjustments. So because our default and our focus share the same colors, we can set this to our surface defaults, and we can keep the border action the way it is. Then our surface action can become our surface action hover light, and the border can stay the same. And then our disableds can also just stay as they were. Okay. So there we have our selected versus unselected. Now, one thing we're going to want to do here is you can also add in like some hover effects here if you want to. So like on hover, while hovering, you swap to this variant, and then on click, you swap to this variant, and then while hovering, you swap to this, and then on click, you swap to this one. It's an option for you to sort of set up some of that prototyping. But we're going to also want to introduce like a label for this. Okay, so this would be our checkbox label. So let's go ahead. Let's not add some auto layout. Let's select both these elements and add some auto layout here, and then set our constraints on this to hug and hug, and center left align, and set this to something like 12. Okay, so this is going to be our checkbox label. So you're going to have a checkbox component or a checkbox label. If you wanted to, you can set this to dot checkbox And what that's going to do is just stop that from publishing. So when we publish the design system at the end, you likely shouldn't see those, and just call this checkbox if you want to. We'll just go with that for now. So let's go ahead. Let's create the component of this, and a couple things that we're going to need to do. First off is we're going to want to have the option to hide this label if we want to. It's more of an edge case more than anything else, but we're going to offer the option to hide label, okay? And then also an option to change that label nice and easily, okay? So add in a text property, but because we already have a property named label, we're just going to add a downward facing arrow here. There we go. So now we have the option to hide that label, but we now lost all the great properties that we built with our checkbox here. So what we need to do is go into our nested instances and expose those properties. So now when I hit our instance here, I see I can hide our label, and I can also toggle between all the great checkbox properties or statuses and types that we built a little bit earlier. Okay, beautiful. There's a checkbox. Okay, so now let's go ahead and look at our radio button. So with our radio button here, we're just going to add an ellipse to the canvas. We're going to set that to 8 by 8, but the size, it's totally up to you. And I'm going to set this to like a darker background so you can see what I'm rocking with, because we're going to set this to a surface default. And then on top of this ellipse is I'm going to add an auto layout frame. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to press Shift A here, okay? And what that's going to do is going to add the auto layout frame on top of that, where I'm going to set the fill to our surface action. See how it's already starting to come together? And maybe we can set this to something like just like an 8 by 8 as well. Keep things nice and snug. Now, this does not look like a radio button. This just looks like a square. So if we add in our radius here, what's the one thing that we notice is that we don't necessarily have like a radius for like that nice round radio button. So what we can go ahead and do is just go in and add that to our radius, where we're just going to have like a round where we can just sort of set it to the largest value in our scale, whatever that is, okay? So now when we go ahead and add in that radius, set that to round, now you can see it's nice and round. But we're also going to need a stroke here as well, which is going to be our border action. You can set it to the inside, to the outside. It doesn't really matter. It's up to you and your brand. And very similar to what we looked at with checkbox, we can maybe call this our dot radio button to stop it from being like published if we want to. But anyways, let's proceed with that for now. And now let's go ahead. Let's create the component. So with that out of the way, let's change their background back to white here. And let's go ahead and let's add in a variant now. So again, very, very similar to what we looked at with our checkbox is we can call this our status. This here is our default. This here will be our hover. So with our hover, surface action hover, border action hover, and the inside element can stay the same. And then with our focus is, I'm sure you guessed it by now, what we need to do is add in an ellipse all the way around, border width of 2 pixels, set that to our border focus, and then copy and then paste it around. And again, use your absolute positioning tool just to get it 2 pixels as best you can. It's tough with a circle, honestly, but I think that's not so bad. And now, even though like this is always going to be a circle, so we wouldn't need to set our constraints. With the focus, always best practice, set those constraints left and right, top and bottom. Okay, so there we have our focus. And then lastly, we have our disabled. So with our disabled, we can go surface disabled, border disabled. There we go. And maybe we want to set this to our surface disabled, but that might be a little bit too light. Sorry, yeah, I'm not a fan of that. So maybe we'll just set this to actually to our icon disabled. Beautiful. So now let's bring these down. And what we're going to do is add another type here, because we're going to have our selected and our unselected. So these are all going to be our selected. And then these here are all going to be our unselected. So with our unselected, what we're going to do is simply just get rid of that ellipse on the inside of each of these. And we're just going to swap that fill to a surface default, our surface action hover light, our surface default, and then our disabled can stay the same. Okay, so there we have our initial radio button variants. But we're also going to need is that label. Okay, so very similar to what we looked at with the checkbox, radio button label. So if we go back to our checkbox components, you can see here, oops, notice the bug share while I was at it. So this should also be set to our text body. So forgive me there. So this should set to our text body. There we go. So let's select both of these, add auto layout, and set the gap of that to 8. Okay. So let's set this to hug and also to hug. And let's go ahead and call this our radio button. Let's go ahead, let's create the component of this now. And let's add in some of the properties here that we did before. So starting off with this should be set to our text body. Perfect. So what we're going to do is let's start off with a layer property for that label, again, just in case we want to hide it, and then also add in that text property for the label as well. So to do this, I'm adding edit emojis and symbols, and then arrow. Beautiful. There we go. So let's create the property for that. So now on an instance here, we can turn that on and off. Also too, is we're going to want to also add in our nested instance. So we toggle on that radio button. So now on our instance, we have all those great properties that we just built from our radio button component. And there you go. There's a radio button. Okay, so next what we're going to do is we're going to build our switch. So this is like our switch or like our toggle. So when it comes to your switch, like depending on how large you want to make it, okay, this ellipse is going to like influence a whole lot of things. So kind of similar to our radio button in that sense. So just like a radio button, okay, so we're adding that ellipse. And again, one thing you might want to do, and sorry, I know like my face is probably covering it on the recording, is just name like the frame, like the ellipse, like knob. And again, as we're going through this, use Figma's AI to like rename all your layers. So I hate renaming layers. Anyways, okay, so now let's make some adjustments here. Because if we visualize what the switch is going to look like, we're going to start with our switch on. So if that switch is toggled on, so we're going to align it at the right. Okay. So let's maybe just set our background here to a different color and then also add a fill. So this is where the size of the knob can help influence like how large you want your switch to be. There's no like best practice here by any means. So like build a switch, insert it into your UI, play around with like how it kind of looks and how it feels. But one thing I might want to do is maybe just make it a little bit more condensed, even maybe set this to something like a 4. Maybe you want it small, nice and tight. And then set our horizontal to something like an 8. Let's play around with that. Let's now go ahead and add a radius at the full frame to something like round. Okay. And I think that's a little bit too long. So maybe if you want to set this to something like a 64 width, you have that option to do so. Okay. But what's something that we noticed here? It's almost like there's too much space here to this right-hand side. So maybe if we maybe set it to something like a 6, that's even better, or even like a 4, I think that looks a little bit more snug. With me so far? Beautiful. Okay, so now let's work on actually applying the color. So if this is our switch on to start, it's like an action that's toggled on. So similar to our radio button and our checkbox, that switch off would be like a little bit more like white, okay? So, and then also that text or that knob, we're just gonna set this to our surface default. Beautiful. Now our switch is really coming to life. We're also gonna add a stroke, which is going to be our border action. And I think we're in some pretty good shape here. One thing too, of course, always add the border width to 1 pixel. And again, if I forgot to do that on any other components, just go back and make that adjustment. So now that we have our switch here, let's go ahead and set our background. And let's just call this switch item. And again, if you don't want to publish your switch, add the period before you create the component of that. Beautiful. So let's create the component of that. I don't know why that won't close. Okay. So now let's go ahead and let's add in a variant. So with our variant, so our first one, this is of course going to be our status. And then this here is going to be our default. And again, I rename it so that it starts with like a lowercase. I always have the name of the variant start with an uppercase, as you can see here, like status. And then the name of the variant itself, like always lowercase, okay? And now let's do our hover. So if this here is going to be our hover, I'm sure you guessed it. So we're going to have our action hover and our border action hover. And we can keep our surface default as is, and there's our hover. Now we also need to do our focus. So if you watched all the other parts of this video by now, I'm sure you know exactly what we're going to do for our focus. Drop the fill, add a stroke, and use our absolute positioning tool. I know they renamed it, so like ignore auto layout, but you know, I'm a Figma OG, so I still like my absolute positioning tool. And we're gonna set this to our border focus on the outside and 2 pixels. There we go. And again, 2 pixels because we want our focus state to be like nice and visible. 2 pixels, 2 pixels, and 2 pixels. And of course, it looks a little weird as a box, but if we set that around, now it looks a little bit more clear. And make sure you can rename like the rectangle to focus in the layer. Sorry, I know my face is covering that. And then set your constraints to left and right, and also top and bottom. Okay, so there we've got a decent looking switch. And then lastly, we got to work on our disabled as well. Okay, so with our disabled, so we're going to start off with our surface disabled, our border disabled, and then same with the knob. Similar to what we did with the radio button, is we don't want to put a surface disabled, but we can apply our icon disabled, okay? And that's going to signify that that's on. Beautiful. So there we have all of our appropriate items here. So now what if, you know, this is if the switch is on, but what about if it's off, right? So with that, let's add another variant here, which is going to be type. And this can be like selected, unselected, as we have with like checkbox and radio button. It could also be on and off, because something could be a switch that is selected, but it could also be on. And maybe just to keep things consistent, maybe this is selected, okay? But like the naming convention here, it's up to you in like your own design system. So, and then these here are unselected, unselected. Okay, so where each of these, we just need to reposition the knob, okay? So to do that, I just really selected all of them. And again, just using our auto layout here, just align that left. So let's make some adjustments now. So our surface action is going to become our surface defaults, and our border action is going to become our border defaults. And let's think about how we want to do the knob here. So select both of these knobs. I think maybe we can do like a border action. It doesn't look half bad, but I think maybe the purple could be a little bit weird. You might want to explore with maybe some different treatments here. I think if we were to do like our icon disabled, I just think it looks a little bit too much like a disabled, or sorry, our icon disabled. I think it looks a little bit too disabled. So I think maybe we can just leave that at the action. I think that's fine. Okay, so then we're going to add our surface action hover lights. And again, maybe this becomes our knob here, will become our action hover. And let's make sure our border is our action hover, which it is already perfect. And there we go. I think we're in some pretty good shape. So we have, make sure there's no variant overlaps. So just to summarize here, we can switch between all the different items for hover, for focus, for disabled, and also for selected or unselected. Now, very similar to our checkbox is, of course, we're also going to need like that label, okay, and the radio button. So radio, let's add in the label, radio button label here. Sorry, there's someone honking outside. You might hear that. And let's set that to our text body. And then select both, add some auto layout. So let's see what we did here. So we set the gap to 8, and let's try to be consistent. Set that gap to 8 as well. Make sure that this is set to hug and hug. And I think we're in some pretty good shape. So let's go ahead and let's call this our radio button. And let's create the component of this, okay? So now that we have the component created, let's go ahead and, of course, I'm sure you guessed it by now, add a layer property for the label, just in case there's ever a use case where you do want that label hidden, and then also a text property for that label as well. So to get that, edit emojis and symbols, use that downward facing arrow. There we go, because we can't have two properties with the same name. So when I bring down an instance here, again, I can turn on and off that label, but again, we still need to add our nested instances to expose all those great properties that we created with our switch item. So now when I select that, I have our switch item where I can toggle everything between selected, unselected, so on and so forth. And again, you can also do some prototyping here as well, where if like while hovering, you go, here. On click, you go here. While hovering, you go here. While hovering, you go here. And then on click, you go here. Okay, so you can add some prototyping there as well. And beautiful, there's our switch. Sorry, and I realized I made a catastrophic mistake. This should not say radio button. This should say switch. I clearly need more coffee today. I don't know why I had radio buttons on my mind. But anyways, correcting that. Don't do that. Sorry about that. That's on me. Okay, so now let's go ahead and let's look at our text area. So for our text area, we're going to actually reuse our label component now. So again, hopefully you can see how like using a label component allows you to bring that into other components beyond just an input that you might need. Okay, so what we're going to do here is maybe just a trick. What you can do is if we just take this, okay, and then just bring it into our text area here, we can extend it out. But first, let's hide that icon, and we can just detach this, okay? And now just extend this down. Okay, so just saves us from having to rebuild that first part again, but we're still gonna need to go ahead and add in our properties. Because if we think about like our text field, text area, it's different than a field because a text area might be for like long form text, tell me about like your medical history. I don't know, something like that, where you need to give the user a little bit more space. So that's why we're just extending that down. In terms of the height, it's really up to you how like tall or how high you want like your fields and stuff like that. It ultimately doesn't matter at the end of the day. So there's really no right or wrong answer here. So with that, one thing you can do if you really wanted to is actually put this as like a text area, okay, dot text area, and then create the component of this, and then the instance will get attached to the label. Okay, so now you have control over your text area and also your label. With me so far? So with that is we still do need to go ahead and re-add in these properties, because remember we just detached our initial component. So starting off with our icon left, there we go. And then also add in an instance swap for that icon left. You guessed it. Add emojis and symbols, downward facing arrow. There we go. Create the property, same for icon right, layer property, icon right, and then instance swap, icon right, there we go. And then also for our, maybe we'll set this for our body, our text body, and then maybe just a layer property for like the label, okay? Create property for, oops, sorry, I didn't mean to do that, detach, create property for the label. Okay, so this is good in theory, right? With me so far. But what's different about a field, like a regular field, versus a text area? Is that the field, like it's just going to be, if I was to shrink this back down, it's just going to be on one line. Like the lines aren't going to be overlapping, right? But all of a sudden with a text area, what's going to happen is you're going to have more than one line of text. And all of a sudden, if you have this icon left, it's going to be really, really weird if like there's just a bunch of space on either side. So got you there, because what we're actually going to do is we're going to remove that icon left. And now we can just remove the icon left, and it looks like we have an issue here. So let me see what I did. So let's just say we're just going to set this to icon, and then set this to icon, okay? So conflicting property names, and we're just going to remove that. And sorry, that shouldn't be the instance. There we go. Perfect. So now on our text area, we have icon and icon, okay, that we can toggle on, and we don't need to worry about that icon left causing unnecessary white space. Okay, I did that for a reason. I just wanted to show you, just so you'll learn. Okay, so now we have our text area here. Let's go ahead and create the component of this. You can also add some hint copy here if you'd like, or also some character counts if you would really like to. So maybe just for hint copy, what you can do is just like hint copy in the middle, drag it in. You can also create, make sure the hint copy is its own component. If you'd like to have like exercise some control over that, you maybe set that to our text placeholder so if it's a little bit light. And you can add in a layer property here for hint copy, And then of course, add in a text property for that hint copy as well. Edit emojis and symbols, downward facing arrow. There we go, just like that. Okay, so then there we have our text area. Maybe just adjust the gap there to 12. And one thing we notice is we want to expose nested instances for both our label and also our text area. So now when I click that, I see we have all those great properties to choose from. So beautiful. There we have our dot text area and our text area. And let me confirm something here. Perfect, because we also still have this set to our surface default. So I think we're in some good shape. If you wanted to add some character count text, you can do that below. Just make sure to add in like that layer property and also like the text property as well. So perfect. There's your text area. Okay, so next let's look at our tab bar. We need to start off with our tab bar item. So just so we can put like, what's the word we're looking for? Like UI collective. I don't know, something like that. Okay, let's set it to our body, text body. And let's go ahead and add in some icons here. Maybe just like it'll go with like a heart or something. I don't know. Or favorites. I forget what it's called. Yeah, there we go. We have our favorite. Again, set it to 20 by 20. You don't have to, but I just like my icons a little bit smaller. Okay. And let's go ahead and play around here. Okay. So let's set it to hug and hug our text. Keep things nice and snug. So it's 8. Now, if you know me, you'll know with my tabs, I only like an icon on my left. You can have an icon right if you want to. I'm not going to include it. So I'm going to set horizontal padding of 12 and a vertical padding. Where we want to go? Maybe like 12. It kind of looks a little bit buttony, a little bit big. Maybe 12.8. I don't know. I think that's fine. Okay. So with this now, trying to think, do we want to add a fill? You can add a fill if you want to. It sort of depends on if your tab bar is going to be sitting on like what background is usually going to be sitting on. So you can add a fill if you want to, but if you want to maintain that transparent look, you don't need to have a fill. Okay. Okay. So let's call this our tab item, dot tab item. And let's create the component and start adding some properties here. So maybe for our icon, maybe we want to set it to like our icon action, just to like start to offer some differentiation. I think that's not half bad. And then let's go ahead and start adding some properties here. So we're going to add in a text property for the label. There we go. And then add in a layer property for the icon, and then a text or an instant swap, for also that icon. And then I use the downward facing arrow to do this. So I go edit emojis and symbols and then find that downward facing arrow. There we go. So now I can turn on and off that icon and also change the label as well. Okay. So now that we have our initial tab item all set up, let's go ahead and start adding some variants. So let's go ahead and add in some variants here. So we're going to have our status, and this here is going to be our default. There we go. And then if we extend this out, this one here is going to be our hover. So for our hover, I'm sure you guessed it by now, action hover, and then you can go like text action hover if you'd like to. We're going to add in a surface here for something like surface action hover light. Again, you don't necessarily need a background for your hover. This is where like find a style of tab that works good for you that you really like and just use that. And then we're also going to need a focus. So no focus is like hands down the most tedious. So one thing you can actually do is we just go back to one of your other components. Maybe if we go back to like our button, you can actually just copy that focus if you'd like to, so you don't need to redo it all again, and then just paste it in. And then again, just position it 2 pixels on either side, readjust it. Okay. And it's going to maintain all the properties with it. So there we have our focus. If I was to set this to like hello, still like that focus follows with it. Okay. So it just saves time that way. And then what we can do is set this to our disabled. Okay. And we're going to set this to our icon disabled and then our text disabled. There we go. And again, you can also add a background here if you'd like to. Let's go with like our surface disabled. There we go. Again, you can do that if you want to. In a tab bar, it might look a little harsh, but again, to each their own. Perfect. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and let's add in a type variant. That's going to be our unselected. So these here are unselected tab items. And we're going to want to then bring down these if they are selected, of course. So what are the selected tab items? So what you can do here is just select each of them and add in a stroke that's on the bottom, and that's 2 pixels in width. And we're going to set that to our border action, okay? With the exception of our hover, where that's going to become our border action hover, and here is going to become our border disabled. Okay, so basically what this is showing is like which one of these is actually selected. If it's underlined, it's selected. If it's not underlined, then it's not selected. Think about just like a logical tab bar. It's usually the function. So then to piece together your tab bar is you just extend a bunch of these out. Okay, so extend a bunch out. There we go. However many you want. Again, you can still hide them in your layers as well. Call this your tab bar. And then what we're going to do is we're going to add a stroke on the bottom of our entire tab bar. So not again on the individual like tab items, but on the overall tab bar itself. Set this to your border default and then just hide a couple. Okay. So however many you might have. And then when you extend this out, what happens is that, you know, there's always like that linear bar at the bottom of your tab bar to show that this is a connected component. So when I set one of them to selected, like that purple highlights which one is selected and which ones are not. Okay. One thing you might also want to consider doing here is going back and giving these like a body medium semi-bold so it stands out a little bit more. Medium semi-bold, medium semi-bold. Okay. That's also an option that you can take just to offer a little bit more differentiation. And if you have a really complex icon set, you can even like set it to filled, or sorry, I think like what's an example here that didn't work as I planned, but you can swap out these icons. So as an example, like if it's filled where we have that favorite border, you can go with like a favorite filled, okay, even offer that level of differentiation, but that's more complex. You kind of need like a really fancy icon set for that. Okay, so there we have our tab bar component. And what's one thing that we lost as well, which is all those nested instances. So again, just toggle all of those on. So now when I select our tab bar on an instance, I can see I have all those great items for me to choose from. Okay, so make sure there's no overlaps in our items. Perfect. So there you have your tab bar. Okay, so next what we're going to be looking at here is our button group. So for our button group, it's kind of like a little bit of a simpler component, believe it or not, where you can put like button group. Okay, we don't want this to be the medium semi-bold, just the medium, and set this to our text body. Okay, so we're gonna add some auto layout just like that. Okay, maybe set this to like 12 and like 12. I don't know. It depends how large you want your button group ultimately. And for this, we're actually gonna add a surface. Okay, which is a default. Then we're gonna add a stroke, which is gonna be a border default 1 pixel, border width of 1, just on that right hand side. Okay. Let's go ahead and you know what maybe we'll do? We'll add in also an icon here. It's going to be a heart, again, 20 by 20, just me adjusting things. We'll add in a heart as well and call this our button group item dot button group item. There we go. So let's create the component. And there we go. Let's add in some properties now. So first off, we can add in an icon property or a layer property, and then an instant swap, similar to as we've done before. Edit emojis and symbols. Where's that downward facing arrow? Just like that. Perfect. And I'm still seeing that Figma bug where, like, if you recall back to our menu, or even though there's only one border here, when I like copy the components, all of a sudden it looks like it's adding it all the way around, which is so weird. I've never seen that before. So I think we're just going to have to manually reset it again every time. Yeah, I don't know what's going on. Okay. Anyways, so there we have our icon. And again, just one for our label too, a text property for our label. One thing you can also do as well, if you want to, is you can also add a layer property for the label. Okay. And then add a text property for the label. If you want to have like a button toggle, you can also do that. That's also an option. Edit emojis and symbols. Where's that downward arrow? Okay. There we go. Beautiful. Okay. Awesome. So now what we're going to do is set this just to right again. Okay. And now let's go ahead and add in a variant. So with this, we're just going to add in a hover. So let's go action hover light, text, action hover icon, action hover border, action hover. And then let's add in a selected. Okay. So let's add in a selected version. This is going to be our action, our border action, our icon on action, and our text on action. Okay. And then lastly, we're going to need a disabled. It's a pretty rare use case to have something disabled with some of these, but good to include it anyway. Border disabled, text disabled, icon disabled. Okay. There we go. So when it comes to your button group, what you're doing is just like really just combining some of these, and see, it did it again where it added that item all the way around. So copy, did it again, whatever. So let's just keep manually making that fix, add some auto layout between them, set that to 0, and look what it did. It added it on all sides now. So let's set that back to right again. And now on our button group, okay, what we can do, we can create the component of this, bring a symbol down for testing. And it looks like every time we make a change here, it just keeps adding back like those borders. So I'm not sure what's going on with Figma, but let's add in a stroke, okay, on the outside of this or inside, it doesn't really matter, and set this to our border defaults, and then set the radius to something like 4. Okay. And when we do that, one thing we're going to have to do as well is just turn clip content on in order to ensure that we achieve the look that we're going for. And then what we can do is set this. Oops, I didn't set, my apologies here, because I didn't name our properties. This is going to be our default. This is going to be our hover. This here is going to be our selected. And this is going to be our disabled. Again, we're kind of merging like status and types here. But it is what it is. So you can show what one is going to look like if it's selected. And again, one thing we just might want to do is just hard code this just to the right. There we go. And there we have our button group component. Now you can also add some different variants if like you want to remove just like the each of these, like you don't want to have like the label. You can be like button, type, toggle, button toggle, or button group, and then button icon group. Like you can kind of get tricky with it and finicky, but yeah, there you can play around different variants as much as you need to for your individual use case. And there you go. There you have your button group. Okay, so now let's look at our link component. Okay, so set this as like a link, and let's go ahead and add in like a home icon for one, and then like an arrow icon for another, or like a window, like external window. Open. Yeah, there we go. Open and new, something like that. So let's go ahead, add some auto layout, and just set this, of course, like a hug and a hug. I'm not too sure why that got set to absolute position, but we'll fix that. And of course, set to 20 by 20. Okay, both of the icons to 20 by 20, and we can set the gap to something like 12 or something, or 8. Doesn't really matter. Okay, so there's our link. Now let's create the component of this. So with our link is to set that, actually, before I forget, to text body. Sorry, I'm always forgetting to do that these days. Is we're going to start with our layer property for our icon left, and then our instant swap for our icon left. Sorry, you'll see I changed my shirt. Then add in a downward facing arrow. There we go. You can just copy that. And then what we're going to do the same for our icon right. Remove that arrow. Icon right. There we go. And then same thing. Okay. Icon right. There we go. So now on our instance, I can toggle on and off those icons, also swap those icons. And then we're going to need just a text property for the label. But we're always going to need a label for our link. Okay. There we go. So toggle that on and off. And then I think we're looking in some pretty good shape. So let's go ahead and add in a variant here. One that's going to be our hover. So this is going to be our status. This is going to be our default. And then this here is going to be our hover. So what you can do is set this to your action hover and then your text action hover. And then we're also going to need a focus. This here is going to be our focus. So very similar to what we did with some of the other ones is we can just go back to our tab bar, select the focus, go back to our link, and then paste it around. Okay, but we're just going to need to make some adjustments here, of course, so that it stays 2 pixels on either side. And I can see it's still set to left and right and also top and bottom, which is perfect, exactly what we want to see. And then also we're needed disabled. Okay, so our icon is going to be our disabled, and then our text is also going to be our disabled. One thing you can also do if you like really want to offer like some differentiation for, you can add like a surface disabled just to show it's like, hey, you can't click this at all. Just make sure to add in a quick radius here of something like 2, just so it looks a little bit clean. Okay, so there we have our link component. I think we're in some pretty good shape. So one thing you can also do as well with your link is you can add in like a different type. So this might be I'll show you what I mean here real quick. So you can add a new variant, which is going to be type. This might be basic. This might be your, or even like your default link. Maybe one thing you might also want to do is for your hover, make that's like your body link. Okay, it's just to show some differentiation. And then what you can do is what's called like an inline. Again, there's different terminologies for it, where everything else is has that link, but that hover might not have that link. Okay, so it's kind of just inversed at the end of the day, and there's just a different like variant set for you. Okay, perfect. So there we have our link. So now that we have our link component, we can use that link component to build out our breadcrumb. Okay, perfect. There we go. So for our breadcrumb, what we're going to do is maybe set that icon right to like that right or chevron right. There we go. And then what we're going to do is copy and paste and then hide that icon left. Okay, so hopefully now you can see how it's already starting to look like a little bit of a breadcrumb. And if we set this to 12, and you can control the number of links you want to cap in your breadcrumb just using your layers. So maybe only in 6, which is kind of best practice, that you don't want to have any more links than that in your breadcrumb. You can just leverage it as such. So you can create that breadcrumb and then hide a couple. Okay, so maybe you only have 3. But one thing that's important to note is that for the last one of a breadcrumb, you can't really go anywhere else, right? So you're gonna have to hide that icon right. And then maybe you might want to set that as inline to show like that's where you are. Okay, that's an option. But then as if you were to hide other layers, like if I was to hide the last 3, because maybe I only have 3, you'd have to apply that same treatment. So a hack is whenever you have that last one, maybe just hide all the other ones before it, which isn't best practice, but it just saves you what's the word I'm looking for? The hassle of having to hide the icon, reapply like the property, all that fun stuff. But of course, we still need our nested instances. So we can toggle those on. Perfect. So now on a copy of our breadcrumb, we have all of these great properties for us to choose from. And again, we can hide our hidden breadcrumb items, also known as our link components, or reshow them from our layers panel itself. Okay, so a breadcrumb, nice and easy component for us. Let's keep moving forward. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's build out an avatar now. So for this, what we're going to do is we're going to search for like our user, like a profile, profile. Let's see. Comes up, person maybe. I forget the specific icon. There we go, person outline. I think that's okay. Okay, so what we're going to do actually is we're going to set this to something pretty large, like 64 by 64 to start. And what we're going to do is we're going to add an auto layout frame. Okay, with me so far? And one thing we're going to do is we're going to add in a fill, which is going to be our surface default, and then set the page background just so you can see what's going on here. So what I kind of like my largest avatar to be 64 by 64. Okay, so let's actually set the parent frame 64 by 64 and then apply in that radius, which should be round. Now what we're going to do, okay, is even if we were to center it inside, is this kind of looks a little bit awkward. So we're actually going to use our absolute positioning tool on the icon itself and extend it out, as you can see, just like this. So try to get it as center as possible. There we go. And then if you select the parent frame and turn on clip content, what that's going to do is going to give you the look of the avatar that you're going for. And because our icon is a little bit weird, even though it's to set it to fill, yeah, it's just still not right. Again, you can play around with different avatars here, different icons here for your avatar, if you'd like to. And there we go. Okay, so there is our first avatar. So I can see the size is 64 by 64. And this is where if we were to create the component of this and add another variant, we can play around some different sizes, right? So what I mean by that, if we have 64 by 64, maybe we have a 32 by 32. Well, that might even be too big. Let's 48 by 48, 48 by 48. There we go. Something in between. So if this is size, this might be our large, this might be our medium. And then what you can do is just like shrink it down so it kind of looks pretty similar. There we go. This here is our medium. And then you might also have a small. Okay. So with the small, maybe that's where we get into something like 32 by 32. And then really just adjust that icon just like that. Okay. So there's your first like avatar. And what we can call this is also like in terms of a type, this is our icon avatar. What we can also do is maybe I might also just want to add in a quick stroke here as well to offer some differentiation. Border default. There we go. One thing we can also do is we can also add in an image icon, an image type. So for this, what we're going to do, we can just simply get rid of the image on the inside and then add in, sorry. If we were to add in, instead of that surface defaults, what we could do is set it to an image. There we go. And maybe I'll upload an image a little bit later on just so you can see it. So you don't need to see my messy files. So there is also our image variants. And then one thing I realized here is make sure that's lowercase. And then you can do the same thing for initials. So if I was to take my initials here, KM, so that's me, set it to maybe like our large semi-bold. There we go. Copy it. Again, remove the icons here and paste it inside. Maybe might make it a little bit bigger. So for this one, maybe we might want to go with an H5. This one, maybe you might want to go with an H6. Again, depending on what feel you're going for. And then this one, maybe you might want to make it like a paragraph. Large is still too big. Maybe a medium semi-bold. There we go. And one thing you should also do as well is just set this to hug and hug just so it stays nice and snug in the center. And you can also do it with the width as well, but it doesn't really matter. Okay. So there we go. There we have some of our initials. And if you really wanted to get fancy on me here, one thing you could also do is you also add a layer property or text property, sorry, for the initials. Beautiful. So we're in some great shape for our avatar there. And now one thing you can also do is you can like create different like groups of these. Okay. So if I was like set a bunch of them, add a bunch of them here. But first, so, let me add like 4 or 5. Okay. And then maybe we can set the gap to like -24 so they overlap. And then this last one, you set it to like +12. Okay, it sort of shows that there's a bunch of other users who are part of this group. That's what's called an avatar group. So you can use your avatars to sort of create like a bunch of different components. So there's your avatar group. And then one thing you can also even do is sort of just like an avatar label. So pretty similar to what we did with like our checkbox and things. So you have your avatar label, set this to your body. There we go. Even this is kind of large. So maybe we can just set that to a small. Just to a small. There we go. You might even have like your avatar label. So that's where you can also create different sizes for your avatar label if like you'd really like to. Flip this to 12. Make sure that's assigned left. Avatar label. And you can even say the name. So if this is like, I don't know, if you're a soccer fan, like Cole Palmer. If they don't have like an image for their name, okay, you can create the components, add in that text property for the label. But what you can also do is, of course, add in the layer property. So label and then label with the downward facing arrow, of course. Edit emojis and symbols, downward facing arrow. There we go. And of course, be sure to add in the text body. There we go. So now you sort of have three components and sort of what from sort of one group. Okay. So there is our avatars all out of the way. Okay. So with our avatar out of the way, let's go ahead and let's build our tag. So over this, we're just going to put like a tag here. Now, there's a couple different types of tags that you can take. We're just going to do one, which is our interactive tag for now. Okay. So for our interactive tag, let's look for our plus to start. Our plus, our add. There we go. Plus. Perfect. And let's add some auto layout. Okay. Set this to hug and hug. And we're going to play around with the gap. Set that to like 8, horizontal padding to like 12, vertical padding to also like 12. Let's also add in a stroke, which is going to be our border action. There we go. Sorry, you might hear some noise outside. There's a big fair going on in Toronto, and I hear it. Okay, so then let's set this as like a radius to 4. And then also maybe set this for icon to our icon action. Okay, so sort of show that something has the option to be selected. Okay, so we're going to call this our tag item, dot tag item. And then let's create the component of this. Now, one thing we might also want to do is also add in like a surface default. So let's go ahead, add in a variant. And we're going to focus on our hover to start. So our hover, we're going to have our action hover lights. This should also be our text body. And then this here should be our text action hover. And then our icon action hover. There we go. And then of course, we're also going to want our focus. So this is our hover. This is our default. This is our status. And when it comes to our focus, we can still do the same thing. Just copy one of our focuses from we had before, paste it. Oops, that's not what I wanted to do. I meant to copy the focus. There we go, just like that. And then we can set it to 2 pixels on either side. Beautiful. So we have left and right, top and bottom. And did I set my properties for this? I did not set my properties for this. So what I can do is just select the tag here. Using the select multi-matching layers tool, we can create the property for that all at once. And we're only going to have a text property. We're not going to have a layer property, meaning we're only going to have the option to change the text and not actually change everything else, and not actually hide the text, excuse me. So we're in some decent shape. And one thing also we just might want to do is also have a disabled, of course. So we're going to add in our surface disabled, our border disabled, and also our icon disabled, and set this to our text disabled. Perfect. I think we're in some good shape for our tag item, but we still do need some other variants associated with that. So let's do that next. Okay, so now let's add like another selected variant onto these tags. And one thing I did is I just renamed this tag because I don't know why I did tag items. Anyways, clearly need more coffee today, I'll tell you that. So let's go ahead. Let's add in a variant. It's going to be our type. Okay, and these ones are going to be our unselected to start. And again, just maintain consistency across what we've done with other components. And these here are going to be our selected. Okay, so with that, what we're going to do, we're just going to swap all of these, not the top group, just these ones for a close. There we go. And then we're going to set all of the borders, not to a dash, but back to a solid line. And then we're going to adjust. So it's going to be our surface action. Border action is going to remain the same. This is going to become our text on action and our icon on action. For here, we can do a surface action hover, border action hover, text on action, icon on action. Maintain the same as we did here. So text action, border focus, icon on action, text on action. And then our what's the word I'm looking for? Our disabled can stay the same. Okay, so there we have our unselected and our selected tag options. And again, so sort of thought process is like, while hovering on click, it comes here, shows that it's selected while hovering, and then on selected. So there you go. There you have what's called an interactive tag components. We're just going to call it a tag component and keep rocking and rolling. Okay, so next, let's go ahead. Let's look at our loader. Now, when it comes to your loader, like there's a bunch of different things that you can do with your loader in terms of like the style that you want. Okay. So what I always tend to do, we're going to build kind of just an ugly loader, if I'm honest. So we're going to bring in this loader and maybe let's actually set it to the back. Again, there's a bunch of different types of loaders that you can have. Okay. So we're just going to go like this, a loader on all four sides. Just try to get it as close to as possible. I think that looks a little bit too ugly. So let's set it to maybe like 14 and then 14. And how tall is our frame here? So it's 85 by 85. I think maybe if we shrink it down actually to 64 by 64. 64 by 64. So let's then bring in all of our loaders just like that. All of our loaders, just position it. So if you picture, these are just sort of like going around in a circle in a way. Okay. That's basically the look that I'm going for, is where it would just be like a rotating loader more often than not. Okay. So we can remove the fill and then set these to our surface action. And let's go ahead and create the component of this. Okay, so this is set to 64 by 64. One thing I'm going to want to do is I'm actually going to set each of these to scale and scale. And the reason why I'm going to do that is when we add additional sizes here, if I was set this to 48 by 48, notice how the circles scale down with the actual loader. Okay, so if this is our size, this would be our large. Maybe we might have a medium, and then maybe we might also have a small. And here, this might be like 34, 32 by 32, 32 by 32. Okay, and again, there's a ton of different types of loaders that you can actually build. Like you can do ones where it's like, if I drop the fill, add a stroke, like ones like this in a way where you kind of just like nice looking loaders like that. There's a ton of different options that you can do for your loaders, but that's really just how you just set them up in like the grand scheme of things. Okay, so a loader is a really simple component. It doesn't take much to build. I want to show you another trick that you can do in terms of like your loaders and also like interaction wise. So say you have like 4 of these, right? So if I'm going to add some auto layout here. Maybe I'm going to set this one to like the purple. Okay. And then I create the component. Then when I add a variant here, and this is like fun tricks that you can do, is just move this one all the way to the end. Just move this one. Just move this one. Okay. And basically what you're going to do is like after a delay of 200 milliseconds, after a delay of 200 milliseconds, 200 milliseconds, and then after a delay of 200 milliseconds, after a delay of 200 milliseconds, and then lastly, after a delay of 200 milliseconds, right? So then if I was to go ahead, place this in a quick frame, and then preview it, let's just see here. You preview it, it's a little small, but see how like things start to load. So you can play around with like some different treatments for your loader. And that felt like a little bit robotic, but there's a lot of things that you can do for your loader component like that to sort of show that something's loading. Okay, but this is a real simple loader that I see quite frequently. Okay, so picture like this, just like spinning round and around and around and around and around to show that something's loading. Okay, again, teach their own. And there you go. There you have a loader component. Okay, so next let's go ahead and let's do our badge. So when it comes to our badge, we're going to add some text here. It's just like 99. Oops, 99. And we're going to set this to, we'll actually go with our body small. So we're 14 semi-bold in this case. Of course, set this to our text body. So let's go ahead. Let's add some auto layout here and maybe shrink this to like 4x4. This would be like it nice and snug, but this needs to be set to hug and hug. Okay. Now, one thing I like to do is you can just hard code the width, set it to something like 24. And you're going to see why. Or if I was to set this to our surface action, I'm going to want to set it to round. Okay. And we always want our badge to be like that nice, crisp, clean circle. Okay. And hard coding the width, the height and width, like 24 by 24, allows us to do that. So then we can go with our text on action and call this our badge. So where badges usually come into play is if I was to go back and like take an avatar component here, okay? So if you picture like an avatar component, you might have, your badge, oops, bring to front. There you go. You might have your badge like resting on it. That's an example for like a shopping cart. If you're buying online, see how many items are in your cart, that's where badge comes into play. So let's create the component of this and let's add a variant here. So let's add a couple variants. So one of which, let's go with our status. So this is going to be our default. We also might have an error here. So this is where we can set it to our surface error, and then our text error. Okay, I'm not a big fan of that approach in my honest opinion. So one thing you might want to consider is like you can go back and adjust some of your surfaces to make them a little bit light, a little bit darker, but then that might impact other components like an alerts. But because this is so small, one thing you can do is really just use like your icon error and set your text to your text on action, okay, to maintain like that level of like cleanness. And you can even do something like a success as well, where you just swap it for the success, and then an information where you just swap it for an information, and another one where you just swap it for your warning. Okay. Warning. And then also too, if you always be sure again, so to also add a layer property for that badge count. So select one, use the multi-select tool, and just add a text property, sorry, not a layer property, for the count. So now when I bring one of these out, I can change that to like 98. Okay. Now we can also add another variant group here. So if this is going to be type, this might be our default. So these here are all our default. Put that lowercase. We might also want one that's just like a dot. So with the dot, it's almost like if you have like 101, you just want to show that you have like some level of like alerts, but you don't necessarily need to specify a value. What you can then do is set these to 12 and 12, just delete everything inside and then set them to 12 by 12. And now you have just like your dot badge. Okay. And again, I can see there's no overlaps here, but I think these ones are still variant too. Yeah. So these should actually be error. And let me just make sure that these are all named right. So perfect. We have our default error, success, information, warning. Beautiful. There we have a badge component. Okay, so now let's work on our progress bar. So for our progress bar, if we set that to maybe like 200 as a width and the height to maybe something like 8, okay? What we're going to do, we're going to add a fill, which is going to be our surface, action hover light. And let's also set the radius to something like round, okay? And we'll call this progress. Now, a little trick that I do, I'm going to add 2 ellipses, okay? And then I'm going to add some auto layout between them. Call this frame adjust gap. Sorry, I'm sure my face is covering it, or maybe it's not. Call this frame adjust gap, and then set the sizes of both ellipses to 0. Then simply increase the size of that frame. Let's add a fill here. And you're going to see why I did this, because this is like this is a veteran trick, this one. Okay. And then place it inside and then just match the height of it. Okay. And also be sure, set that radius as well to round to keep things nice and consistent. So now when I create the component of this progress bar, notice how this locks, because it's the component. I would have to like increase the width of this on the main component in order for it to change. But on the instance, if I select the adjust gap and set it to 200, oops, sorry. I had the width locked, so set that to hug, okay? Notice how, all of a sudden, using the adjust gap, it took the width that I set the gap to be. So if I set it to 150, now all of a sudden, I don't need to break my component every time. I can just simply adjust the gap. Cool trick, right? So that's a little bit of a veteran trick for you in terms of your progress. And one thing you can even do is, this is kind of like too tall. I kind of like mine to be like 4, and then also like 4. Keep it nice and thin. Beautiful. Yeah. So there you have your progress bar, dot progress bar, because one thing you might also want to do is also have a label where it's like completion. Set this to our small and also body. Because one thing you might also want to do is have some level of like a label for it, like completion 8 or 80%. Again, just an option, what you might want to do. So add some auto layout here, set this to hug and hug. There we go. And now you can call this your progress bar. And again, if you want your progress bar to be even like a little bit thicker, you have that option as well. You know, just make it the made progress bar like 8 pixels tall instead of 4. Again, you can always just still keep adjusting the gap. So if I want to set this to 80%, so like something like 160, I'd have that option to do so. So let's create the component. And one thing we want to do is add in, first set this to fill, add in a layer property here for the label, and then add in a text property also for the label. Beautiful. There you go. Then we go edit emojis and symbols. Where's our downward facing arrow? There we go. Perfect. So now on our main component, we can turn that on and off and also adjust the gap as well. Okay. So there's your progress bar. And let's look at a progress circle real quick. Let's look at our progress circle. So for a progress circle, what I do is I just add just like a canvas here, or a circle, sorry. And what I do then is I just sort of extend this out and just play around with it until I get exactly what I'm looking for. And then I rejoin it. So you're just playing around with like the different circle controls. And we're going to set this to our surface action hover light. And then what we're going to do, just copy and paste another ellipse on top. And we're going to set this one to our surface action. And now we can control sort of the width of that, right? So now so you can sort of see like what that progress might look like. Okay, and so you can also use this as a loader component as well. And this is kind of tall as is. So maybe we set this to like 64 and 64. I might need to reposition it. Sorry, that one is on me. Perfect. There we go. And then what we can do is we can actually just frame this. There we go. Condense this down just so it's perfect. 64 and 64. Beautiful. And I think we're in some pretty good shape here. So this can be like our progress circle. One thing you might also want to do is you can add some text on the inside to something like 80% if you'd like to. So set this to your body and just paste it in on the inside, just like that. Position it in the center. And now if you were to create the component of this, there you go. Okay. So one thing too, as well, that you might want to consider is, again, remember how I talked about like setting things to scale and scale. So if we had decided to add another variant here, what you could do is 64 by 64, 48 by 48. Notice how that scales down. You just need to adjust the text inside of it. Okay. So there's another trick for you as well, if you'd like. And of course, maybe you might not want that text on the inside. So you can add in a layer property here, of course, for the label, and also a text property, of course, for the label as well. So then we can go edit emojis and symbols, bring in that downward facing arrow, and away we go. Okay, beautiful. Let's keep rocking and rolling. And of course, we can call this sort of our size, which is our default if we did have other sizes as well. Okay, perfect. There we go. So there we have our progress bar and our progress circle. Okay, so next let's build our snack bar, sorry. So with our snack bar, let's set it to like, let's go hello, and set it to like our body medium. Sorry, I was looking for that. Actually, no, we'll go with our body large, actually. Let's spruce things up a bit. And we're actually going to set this to our text action to start. Even though it's not an action element, maybe we can even go with the semi-bold too. We'll get fancy with things, okay? So let's call this our snack bar title. And going ahead here, let's also add in some more text. And this is going to be our text body. And we're going to set this to our medium. And what we can do is just add in some basic text, like, lorem ipsum is the standard dummy text of the design industry, something like that. Okay. So in some decent shape, we're just going to add in all the components and then structure it. So we're also going to bring in a link components. Let's also bring in a closable. So a close. And let's also go ahead and bring in, what's the word I'm looking for? Like an info. There we go, in info. So see how we're sort of like structuring the snack bar a little bit. So one thing I want to do to start is I'm going to add a frame here that we're going to call content, and then select our closable or other icon. Okay. And sort of serve as the basis for everything else. Maybe we can set that to like a 12. Now, one thing that's important to note here is depending on how wide we want the snack bar, we're always going to want the close always at the end. Okay, so using fill, we solve that issue. And let's now play around with our auto layout. So like 12 or like 18 even by like 24. I think that's decent for a snack bar. And then add in a fill, surface defaults, stroke, which is going to be our border defaults. And let's also add in a radius as well. Okay, so that radius is going to be something like 8. And maybe we also set this to 18 by 18. Okay, I don't think that's so bad. Okay, so we're in some decent shape here. Now, going back to our link component, if you really wanted to take your design system to a whole other level, is you could also have like colors for your links too. So if we were just to override these for now, just to give you an idea as to what that might look like, it's sort of like can spruce up your snack bar a little bit. Okay, so if we set this to something like learn more, maybe hide that icon left and set that icon right to a chevron. There we go. It looks a little bit more realistic that way. Okay, perfect. So maybe we also might want to set our icon action to purple. And I think we're in some good shape here. Okay, sweet. What also might we want to do to this snack bar here is maybe if we go into our progress bar, we'd be able to maybe just pull it in, but absolute position it so that it stays at the bottom. And the reason why we might want to do that is maybe like there's a timeout for the snack bar where it's like almost like giving you a little bit of a warning, like, hey, like something's wrong, like, or take action here. And then, so you might want that at the end. Again, it's just a nice to have more than anything else. So if we set a horizontal padding to something like 100, that looks a little bit more realistic. But let's just make sure we set that to the bottom and also to the left and right. And what that's going to do is if I extend this out, the progress bar is going to follow with it and always keep it to the bottom as I extend that down. Okay, so that's why our constraints there, super duper important. Okay, so let's call this our snack bar. And let's create the component of this. And let's play around with a couple things here. So maybe, I think we're always going to want the content. Let's just say we do in this case. But maybe we might not want this icon left. So what we can do, is add in a layer property for this icon left. And also add in an instant swap for this icon left as well. So we can easily swap out that icon to something else. There we go, just like that. And then maybe for our closable, maybe we just want a layer property for the close, okay? We're always going to want it a close, and we never have like another type of icon in a snack bar. So now we just have the option to hide that close if we'd like to, okay? Perfect. So we're in some good shape here. And maybe also as well, maybe we also just do want to, if I select the snack bar, on our main component here, maybe we also do just want an option to hide that snack bar, hide the progress bar. So just a layer property for the progress bar. Beautiful. So I think we're in some good shape here, and also just expose any nested instances if we do have them for like the link. And we probably won't need them for the icons themselves. So maybe just the link for now. I think that's pretty good. So we're in some decent shape there for our snack bar, but there's also some variants that we can add for our snack bar. So things like, if this is our status or type, this could be our defaults. This could be just based on some of the other colors that we have. So it could be a success, icon success, surface success. So this is where we're kind of having to override some of the colors here, just so we don't have variants for those, but you can create variants for those if you'd like to. And because our surface success is relatively light, we might want to set that just to icon success. Again, just make it work. So then if we were to create another one, maybe we might have an error if there's something like urgent that you should take issue of. So error, and then also error. And then we can also have, a warning. So for this one, really similar, warning, and then also warning. And then also really similar to something like an information, where it's our information, and then also our information. And then this here is going to be our information. There we go. So we have a bunch of different variants for our snack bar. Looks like this one did not get named here. And perfect. So our snack bar is in some pretty good shape. So we can swap between all the variants. We have our nested instances and some different types as well. And the snack bar is a kind of a nice component. Like if you're in an interview, being able to show that you know how to build this component because it leverages a bunch of other like Atom components. It's pretty good to have up your alley. So there you go. There's your snack bar. Okay, so let's look at our carousel now. So, sorry, not carousel. I should be searching for like our chevron left. Okay, so when it comes to our carousel, let's add an auto layout there. So I just press Shift A, and maybe we'll set this to 8 and 8, and let's set it to our icon action. Let's go ahead and also add a stroke, which is going to be a border action, and we're going to set the border width there to 1. And let's set the radius to round. Beautiful. Let's also set the surface to defaults and call this our dot carousel item. There we go. So let's go ahead and then create the component of this. And now let's start adding some variants here. So a couple of variants that we're going to have is just a hover and a focus. Actually, we can do a disabled too, now that I think about it. Okay, so for our hover, so of course, let's call a property 1 to status. And this one here is, of course, default. And then this here is our hover. So for our hover, let's go with a surface action hover light, our icon action hover, and then our border action hover. And then, of course, we're going to need a focus as well. So for our focus, what we are going to do is let's go back to one of maybe our tag component that has that focus. Actually, we'll go back all the way back to our radio button, actually, because our radio button has a rounder focus. So let's do that and simply just plop it around. So we don't need to recreate some of the styling because that's always probably the worst part. And then try to get it 2 pixels on either side. Okay. And of course, left and right, top and bottom. And then there we have our focus. And then we're also going to need our disabled. So with our disabled, you know the drill. Just change it out to your disabled, your icon disabled, and your border disabled. And then what we can do is just drag these down and then just select the icons here. Okay, because we're going to need, and so this can actually be direction. So these here are going to be our left, and then these here are going to be our right. Where what we're doing is we're swapping out each of these icons for the other one. So chevron left is going to become our chevron right. Okay, so there we have our carousel item. Next, what we can do is look at sort of the bar that goes in between the carousel items. So just as a visual, if you have like a carousel, maybe you have some images above, or you're like toggling in between, you're going to want a bar just to show you like how many more might be left. Okay, so with this, I always like to add in a frame here and just set this to like a surface. I don't know, action hover light, and let's also set the radius to round. And then let's make it nice and thin. And then what we're going to do is just copy a frame and simply just overlay it on the inside. So we have one frame within another. So our first frame we can call sort of our not scroll bar per se, but carousel bar. And then we have our carousel progress as the other name. Sorry, I know my face is probably covering this. Let me see if I can extend this up. Perfect. So we have our progress bar and our carousel progress. And with our carousel progress, it's like bring it, like somewhere in the middle here and just change it to like a surface action just so we can see it. Okay. So a couple of things here is as we extend this out, we're going to want this to also extend with it. So if we set that to scale, then if I extend this out, notice how that is also extending with it. So it's going to go great for in between our carousel. So if I was to create the component of our carousel bar, bring down a copy here and just place it in the middle and then set this to like 24. There we have our carousel now. Okay. So there's a lot that you can do with this component in terms of like customization, making things the way that you like it. Again, even this is kind of like our carousel bar, 5 pixels tall. It's kind of weird. Maybe you want to go with like a 4 pixel tall and also set your carousel progress to 4 pixels tall to keep things a little bit more like nice and snug. But again, to each their own, play around with it as much as you want to in order to achieve the look that you're going for. You might also say that maybe these themselves are a little bit too like wide. So you can even set these to like 4 and 4 for a little bit of like a more snug look. But and then there you have your carousel. And also be sure to put a dot in front of carousel bar so we know not to publish it. And there we go. There you got your carousel. Okay, so I want to go back to our button now and actually go through and build like a button icon component. And this is like super easy. A button icon component, it's kind of just used for like most things, if I'm honest. Like think it'd be used for things like a close, sorry. Like a close, anywhere where there's just like a solid icon that's a button. It can be best practice in order to use your button icon versus a regular icon itself. Not to say that like you need to do that. It does add another layer of complexity, but you can do it, okay? So what I did there is I just copied our button component, renamed it to button icon, and I'm just going to remove the label and the icon right. And that's only going to leave us with our icon left. Okay. Now, what's one thing that we notice here is like, this kind of looks a little bit awkward because something's off with our width and our height. So I like to have them as a perfect square. So I'm going to set it to 44 by 44 and you can just hard code it that way. Like it doesn't, nothing needs to be super specific. Just depending on the size that you're going for. Actually, let me check this. So I changed my mind actually. Sorry. Our height is actually 36. So we're going to hard code these to 36 by 36. So there's a level of consistency there with the button. My apologies. And then what we're going to do for all of the properties is now remove the ones that were associated with our icon right and also our label and just removed icon left. So it's only icon, okay? So instead of having to recreate a brand new button icon component, we can kind of repurpose our other components in order to build that. So quick hack there. Beautiful. There's your button icon. Okay, so now let's look at our table component. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're just going to bring in just some copy here. Okay, we're going to set this to our text body. And we're going to add some auto layout and we're going to keep it nice and thin. Okay, so nice and tight, like a 2 by 2. Now we're going to call this our dot cell item. Item. Because tables are kind of weird because you need to remember that like Figma is not built to handle tables. Anyone that tells you differently, it's really not. So what this cell item is going to do is if we picture like our table cell, okay, or say we have a cell for a table, like your table cell or your cell item is going to go inside of that cell. And we can add a bunch of variants here to like for all these different use cases. So if I was to add a variant for this, okay, what we can do is we can even we can even add in like a checkbox, like a check. Like a checkbox. Okay, we can include it in there. Of course, we'd want our checkbox to be a little bit smaller, so that's where we need to play around with some different sizes. But we can also play around with like an icon. Maybe we want an icon in there, or even like a link. Let's maybe bring in a link, right? So we can bring in a link into one of these things, into one of our cells. Also, too, we can even just add in like icon, right? So maybe if you just add in like a heart or a favorite, like a favorite in here, okay, set it to 20 by 20, 20 by 20, get rid of the copy, just copy and paste this 3 times. So now you have like an action cell, right? So maybe it's like download, edit, view more. So to make it come to life, like view, or maybe like there we go. This is edit, and maybe this one is like a chevron, right? Chevron, right? So you start to play around with different items that would go into your cell. Now, for the purposes of this exercise, we might just stop there, okay? And let you sort of imagine what this would be. This would be like our type. Maybe this here is just like our basic copy. Maybe this one here is also just our basic, what word am I looking for? Sorry, link. And maybe this one's like a action, that go into that cell. Now, what we're going to do with our cell item is we're going to bring one of these down and add an auto layout frame over top of it. Maybe set it 12 by 12, and we can probably stop there. Now, one thing, of course, that we're going to want to do here is also just add in just some properties here. So, label and, instant swaps for each of these icons. So, but I'm not going to do that now. I'll let you do that. And then what we're going to do is call this our cell item. Or cell, excuse me. So if we create the component of this, now, okay, first off, let's turn on our nested instances for things like our link. And now what we can do is we can turn on nested instances for our cell item. So now when we hit this copy, we can now swap this out for something like a link. Again, be sure to set this to hug and hug. Swap it out for a link, for your action, or also for your copy as well. Beautiful. Now, when it comes to your cell, is that you think about a table. Tables can be kind of structured a little bit differently, right? You might have a horizontal, you might have tables in rows, you might also have tables in columns. So this is where what you're going to do is actually just start to break this out a little bit, okay? And one thing I'd like to highlight here is, let's start off with maybe just like our column. So let's just add a bunch of items for our column, okay? So we can call this our column component. And then when we extend this out, we have to make sure everything stays left aligned here, of course. Left aligned. There we go. Make sure everything in here is proper. Okay, perfect. So there we have our column. Now, these columns would join together to make a table, right? Nice and easy. Now, one thing that I would also like to call out is with the column itself is we're also going to need some type of header, okay? So this is where you can kind of get fancy a little bit, where in the cell, you can have one type that is copy. So this would sort of be like your copy or content. And then another one that's your header. With your header, you might override some of these elements and set it to like a medium semi-bold, and also maybe even change the background a bit, okay? So for it to be like a surface, maybe like a surface disabled, or it's even like too strong. Yeah, we'll leave it as is for now, okay? So we'll get rid of that. Maybe it's just a little bit stronger. So then in your cell, that top one would be a header component. And if you really wanted to, again, you can add in sort of like, see what we have here. Like an action hover light. I don't know, something to signify that like that's the top part of that cell. Again, purple is probably not the most ideal color in the world, but like it is what it is. Something like that. Okay. And set that to fill. Beautiful. Now, something that I would like to call out here is, let's say we have all of these columns arranged together, and then we create the component of this, and we bring this down, okay? To like modify the cell, we actually have to detach the component again. And we don't want to do, we want to avoid having to detach components as much as we can, but tables like aren't built that way. So you're going to recall in some of the earlier components, we had this idea of like a gap, of like an adjust gap component. And we're going to introduce that same concept here. So this is going to be our column component to start. Because again, columns are made up of rows, or tables are made up of rows or columns. They can't be both. So we're going to have a column component to start. Now, one thing we might also want to do to offer some differentiation is add a stroke just on the bottom, where we set that to a border default. So now it looks a little bit more realistic. So now what we're going to do for our adjust gap is, if you recall, like during, because the thing that's tricky about like table components and why it's so important that we have it is, say you have a table component here. Okay, let's call this table. And we know that's like, oops, I'm sorry, I'm going to create the component of this. And we know that not every column is going to need like the same width. Okay, some columns might need to have a longer width for a longer description. Some might need a shorter width. And the only way to adjust that, like, is to kind of like break the component. Okay, we're going to need an easy way to do this though. And that's where we introduce the idea of adjust gap. So what we're going to do is, if you're going to recall, during some of our earlier components, we had this concept where we could adjust the gap in order to adjust the width without having to break the component. We're going to bring in that same concept here. We're going to set the gap to something like 12. Make sure this is set to hug. And then select, let's call this adjust gap. And then set both these to 0 and 0. Okay, the width and height to 0. And then what we can do is take your adjust gap and place it inside of the column component. Now, you're going to notice that it just sort of goes all the way to the top there. And let's just be sure to left align that. So now on any of these table cells. Sorry, we're going to go down here to an instance of like what is like a table component. You can see here on the layers, and I don't think my face is covering it. So no, I think you can see it okay. How we can see adjust gap. If I was to set this to something like 200, right? It's going to extend beyond. But what we can do is we can use hug in order to bring all these elements out, and then just set each of these to fill. So now what we essentially did is we adjusted the width of the column without, see, there's a great example, without needing to break the component. Okay, so that if you show this in an interview, you have the job. Okay, like this is super like complex level of componentry, genius level stuff, if I'm honest. Okay, so let's call this our column table, and let's just add a bunch more cells, rows here. Standard's 1440, so I can see this is set to 1040 as like a width of a table. I think that's like pretty good in the grand scheme of things. Okay, so there's our column table. One thing we can also do as well is this can also be a dot column table, because one thing we might also want to do is add like a table header, like call this my advisors or something. My advisors, where we set this to like I don't know, maybe like an H5 or an H whatever that works, and set this to our text headings, and we can add some auto layout between these to sort of kind of have like this, what's the word that I'm looking for, like a heading for what this data is to represent. Okay, so we can maybe set this to something like 24. There we go. I think we're in some decent shape. Yeah, I think things are looking pretty good. One thing we might also want to add here is so I'm trying to think here. So let's go ahead and add in a stroke, actually. So a border defaults 1 pixel on the outside. Okay, so just to clean up some of that data. And we might also even want to add in a quick radius. Set it to something like 8. There we go. So this is your dot column table. This might be your column table. But I'm not going to create the component of this just yet, because one thing we might also want to do is combine both like our column table and also our row table together, and then we can add properties in order to like hide like that table header, change the table header, and all that fun stuff as well. So let's create our row table first before we join these together as components. Okay, so now let's work on our row. So what we're going to do is let's just bring some of our cells here and just place them side by side. And it looks like we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then 8 going across. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, then 8. Set the gap to 0. And let's call this our dot row. And this should be our dot column. There we go. And one thing I'm also noticing here too is these are all 130 in width. So let's maintain some level of consistency and just set each of these to 130. Okay, and we can't have a just gap for our rows. It just doesn't really work that way. Okay, so let's go ahead and create the component of this now. So there we have our row. So just as we used our column to build our column table, we're gonna do the same thing. So I see we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 plus headings. So we'll do the same. So 11, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then 10, and then 11 here at the top for the headings. And let's make this our headings. There we go. So there we have our dot row table. Okay. And then let's do the same as we did above. So border default 1 pixel on the outside. Set the radius to 8. There we go. There we have our row table. Now, if we think about our row table and also our column table, is one thing I'm actually debating that might make sense for us to actually do is maybe swap out, use these as actually, so if I was to detach these, delete these core components. And what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to combine these into one component set. So now we have our table type, our dot table type, where we have our column component. So our type, where we have our column component, and then we have our row table. So we have our column and our row, that we can swap out in between. So what this actually allows us to do then is if we have a specific like look that we go for our tables, and let's look at like an example of what that might look like. So say if we have like a heading here, which is like my advisors or our advisors, okay, and we set this to like H4, okay, and make sure that this is set to our headings. Okay, let's group these together, add some auto layout, maybe just on this side actually, where we set this to something like 12, then 12, okay. And now on the outer frame, maybe we might want to add a stroke. So on the outside, which is a border, default, something like that. And we can maybe even just reduce the gap to 12. So say if there's a certain look for, this does look a little bit messy, but like 24 by 24, or a certain look that you're going for. Like maybe if I also bring in like some buttons here, place them at the end, maybe it's like download as an example. We'll swap this out for like a download, export to Excel, like that kind of thing. Okay, you can also create like this bar as a component, but we're not going to do that now. So now what you can do is you can have your table component, but inside your table component, if you turn on those nested instances, what it's going to allow you to do is actually just swap between the column table and the row table, depending on what your data use case is. Okay, so I know table components can be a little bit confusing. So there's a lot of like options that you can do with your table component. But if you were to set up a table component, that is exactly how I would do it. Okay, make sure that's set to our text headings, which it is. Beautiful. So there you have a table component. Sweet. So now it's actually time to publish the design system now. So to publish it, like what it means to publish a design system, it's basically like, okay, you're now ready to have other people consume this design system. That's basically what that's saying. Okay. If the design system is not published, then people cannot use it. Only those within the file can use it. So in order to publish a design system, hit that little drop down and hit publish library. Now, Figma Make, I hate how they have ads for it everywhere, is one thing I'd like to call out here is that this you can only publish if you're on in like a paid like Figma team space. Okay. I am in one. You can tell how it says like a team name, like right there in like the top left. Anyways, so what essentially it's going to do when you publish a library for the very first time, like it's basically going to give you everything, including all of your icons. And because I have like thousands of icons here, like I'm also going to publish those too. So it's going to take a while. This year is where you can go through and just confirm that all like the components that you want to publish have been published, or you can just choose to unpublish ones that should not have been published at a later date. But anyway, so let's go ahead and publish this library, and it's going to take like 10 or 15 minutes. So I'm going to go ahead and pause the video. So as you can see here, I had hit publish, and now the library itself is actually publishing. So because I have so many icon components and there's so many icon variants, it's not just publishing like the components, it's publishing all the variants associated with it. And if we go into like the material UI icon set, like each of the icons have like 4 variants with them. So that's just why it's taking so long. It's one of those things you just got to stay tight with. Okay, so now that our design system has stopped publishing, now it's ready to subscribe to. Now, if you're in that team folder, okay, you can subscribe to that design system. Now, in order to subscribe to that design system, what you're going to do is up under this Figma thing here. So hit the Figma icon and then go down to libraries. And then what it's going to do is that, so right away here, you can see that there's no changes inside of this, no changes to this current design system. Okay, so nothing has been changed. All of these components, again, this is where it's going to show you where all these components that have been published, and you can select which ones to also unpublish or republish, okay? As you make changes, you can republish the design system, and it's only going to show the components that have been changed for you to republish, okay, which is nice. And then what you're going to want to do is you can go through Teams or UI kits, both ways work, to really just, I won't do that because I have a ton of like other design systems that I can't show under Teams and UI kits. So in order to do that, you would just find the one and then just hit subscribe. It really is super simple. And then in that file, you would then have access to this design system. So it's really a straightforward approach in order to make changes and like republish. Let me just give you a quick example here. If we were to set this radius to like 4, okay, and then Oops, sorry, wrong one. Let's go to publish this library. Notice how it's only going to show you the button, and I made changes to the table like when we weren't looking. I was just playing around with it, so that's why it's showing that. So now how it's showing you everything that's unchanged, hidden, and also the components that are available to republish, where you can toggle them on and off. So design system management, it really is a simple thing. And just like that, there you have all the components you need to get your design system started. So let's rock and roll. Hey, thanks for watching, and quite frankly, making it this far. If you want to watch a video, I highly recommend you can click right there. It goes through a little bit more of like an advanced design system setup. Or if you want to support myself, the team, what we're doing at UI Collective, making this kind of content free for all and making design education affordable for everyone, you can support us in the link down below by purchasing our founding membership to the UI Collective Academy. Thanks so much for your support. Really appreciate it. See you at the next one.